How's it going, everybody? Great to see you. How's it going? See a couple people here already making comments. See 3 people here. Can everybody hear me? Sarah's just enraptured. Great to hear you. Great to have a sense of humor. Comment Jonathan Castle there. 18%. Yes, Craig. We're certainly going to be talking about the new Leger poll. We're going to be talking about that. Brianna will be here. She's just putting our son to bed. It's his bedtime. So she'll be down ASAP. Yeah, no, certainly. Anthony, hey, how's it going? Thanks for saying hi. No, this has been an exciting day for the NDP for a whole bunch of reasons. Singh has continued to impress people wherever he goes. He's mobbed by onlookers and well-wishers and looky-loos and just people wanting to see what all the fuss is about. And I think that, you know, uh, starting before this debate, but really for the last couple weeks, Singh has been rising, in terms of personal approval ratings, but hasn't really started to show in the actual polls yet. Now, there were a couple early signs. Again, that support for Singh is an early sign. His numbers can often be seen as a leading indicator. But, some of the worst polls for the NDP were moving up. Like Main Street, for instance, had the NDP last month well below 10, and they've slowly been inching up, and now they're nearly at 15. So on the whole, things have been moving up for the most part, but it wasn't until this Leger poll today, one of the first full polls done after the debate, which has this being a very interesting and potentially historic race. The NDP at 18 isn't phenomenal, right? It's not phenomenal. It's basically right where they were at the end of the 2015 election. But what is special about this poll is that it has the Liberals and Conservatives at 31. So 31-31, it has the NDP at 18 and the Greens at 11. That's a good number for the Greens. That's a good number for the NDP, but those are both really bad numbers for the Liberals and Conservatives. I don't think it's ever been the case that both of those parties have been so close to going under 30%. It's almost always, they're both well above 30, or in a really bad election for one of them, they'll fall below 30, but then the other one will be close to 40, or at least well above 35. But this is showing that because the NDP is strong, that because the Green Party has more strength than it often does, and because the Bloc is rising, and the PPC, even though they don't have a ton of support, have, a few percent, it's eating away at both of the big parties. And this is great news because neither of those parties can be trusted with a majority, right? Like neither of them can be trusted with a majority. But beyond that, it's great because it's showing a real sense that Canadians are willing to explore other parties. Now, most of us aren't PPC fans, but we can acknowledge that people on the right are disappointed with the Conservatives, and they're registering that. And we might not all agree with the Bloc's vision, of separatism, but we can acknowledge that there's a sense that the traditional parties aren't doing it for them either. And so this is a really interesting time in Canadian politics where it might be the case that no single party in this election gets more than a third of voters. And that'll be a first time in federal Canadian politics. Alibi says CBC poll tracker has them at 13.8. Yeah, one thing to know with the poll tracker is that by design, and this is one of the good things or bad things about a poll tracker, is because it tracks multiple polls from multiple pollsters and gives them a weight, it tends to dull trends, at least at first. Because if one pollster, has a party really high or really low, it'll affect the poll tracker, but it'll be counterbalanced by the consensus, if such a thing exists. So, for instance, the NDP being at 18 in one poll will move the NDP up. Now, this poll hasn't been added to the poll tracker yet, but because a lot of pollsters have the NDP at 13 to 15 right now, that's where most pollsters are. 13 to 15, that's why the number is around 13.8. It's around 14. And so, until other pollsters start coming in with similar data, the poll tracker is sticky. Now, that's good because what if this Leger poll is an outlier? Or what if a poll that has the NDP at 10 is an outlier? You don't want these things swinging your average too much. So keep that in mind with the poll tracker. It's good for getting a general sense of things, although it's not perfect. But if there is a trend happening, it'll catch it later than individual pollsters would, because those individual pollsters aren't being weighed in relation to other polling firms. Yeah, Jonathan notes they haven't, and there hasn't been. Not all pollsters have done post-debate polls. Nanos, for instance, I believe, does a 3-day roll where they poll every single night, but they only have one full post-debate day poll in there. And so they haven't rolled off the back yet. So it's perfectly conceivable that they haven't captured an NDP trend. But what you're seeing is that from Innovative, they've talked about how the NDP clearly won the debate. Forum is suggesting the NDP's numbers are rising, especially for Singh. Campaign Research hasn't released numbers yet, but they say that Singh has, quote unquote, broken the sound barrier. And all of this is indicating, at least potentially, that something special is happening and that pollsters are starting to catch the trend. Even Main Street only has the NDP at 14 something. But again, you have to compare that to where the NDP was in Main Street a month ago, which was below 10. The Main Street had the NDP at like 7 seats, like being destroyed basically. And now we're at a point where Main Street has almost doubled that support. And so that's an important context. You know what I mean? Whereas, a poll having us at 16 that had us at 15 last week, that's good, but it doesn't necessarily mean as much because that's just 1%. That's well within the margin of error. It just could be, statistical noise. Zachary notes that he was canvassing tonight, noticed a difference. Zachary, I'll note that I don't disbelieve you because last federal election in Kingston, it was that very long election, if you recall. And Kingston's a safe liberal riding federally. Yeah. Kingston's a safe liberal riding federally, 100%. But there was a sense that it was in play for us at the NDP, or at the very least, people were really on to us. And if you talk to our candidate in the first half of that election, they loved him. Everyone answered their doors. They were taking signs. They were seeing him at the farmer's market and on and on and on. But by the end of that election, we were dead to them. Everyone's like, I'm voting liberal to stop Harper. Like, I don't care about the NDP. And in some ways, this is the inverse, where before the election, it's like we couldn't get any coverage. And now people all of a sudden are seeing us and liking us. And you will see that in the individual interactions with people. I noticed something similar in the Ontario election, where people who would never have talked to us before were all of a sudden considering Andrea Horwath. It was great, but it was weird. Like, we were calling phone numbers in the most conservative parts of town, which we normally would never do because we wouldn't have the time. But we had so many volunteers and our numbers were so high. It's like, yeah, let's call, fours that are conservatives. And we were still getting some uptake from them. Drew says, hi, Krista. How's it going? So Brianna is here, guys. Everyone say hi to Bree. Bree, you want to say hi?
Hello.
I am trying to get Bree on camera. She'll be on at some point, but
where are we at here?
We are at, I'm just going through here. Drew says, will it be worth doing well if Singh results in a sheer government? First of all, I'm not here to play the strategic voting game. At the end of the day, what this Leger poll has shown, and now this is just one poll, but it's shown a couple key things. It's showing that the Singh momentum is good, but the Conservatives were down 3 and the Liberals were down 3. So NDP momentum is not necessarily 100% liberal to NDP. It could be the NDP taking votes from the Greens or the Bloc or even, yes, the Conservatives. So, Jagmeet Singh improving his results won't hurt them. And even if you think that's true, look, the NDP got 19 last election and the Liberals won a majority. So it's very possible, this argument that the NDP at 18 hurts the Liberals isn't true. If the Liberals lose and the NDP are at 18, it's because the conservatives beat them. You know what I mean? Like, even if you are a strategic voter, because the liberals have proven they can win a majority with the NDP at 19 or 20. So they can certainly win a minority government with the NDP at 20, even 25 potentially.
So Mitch Hoskins is asking, how's voter turnout being predicted?
Pollsters look at various things. They can ask people, one, who do you plan on supporting? And then, do you plan on voting? Are you like likely to vote / have already voted? Because, there's advanced polls. Are you somewhat likely? Are you not very likely? Are you not at all likely to vote? And what they do that for a couple of reasons. That can measure turnout, which can be used to help their models, but it also helps them decide, how to weigh votes. So for instance, if it's like, yeah, there's a lot of young people who support candidate X, but they admit they're less likely to vote than, say, senior citizens, we can use that in our weighing models. That's not perfect, of course, but it does play a role. There's a couple factors here with turnout that are somewhat contradictory in this election. Generally, high turnout benefits quote unquote left-leaning parties. Now, I think, and many of you probably think, that the Liberal Party is a center-right party, but people see them as left-leaning. And so when turnout is high, that means more young people are voting, more people of color are voting, more Indigenous people are voting, more low-income people are voting. And they generally all vote for like Liberals or NDP or Greens or what have you. On average, more so. Of course, there are poor conservatives and there are black conservatives and there are Indigenous conservatives. But we're talking about aggregates here. And so when turnout is good, it's often bad news for conservatives and right-leaning parties. This is why the Republicans hate, black people voting. This is why they've done everything in the United States to stop them, right? Because they know if they vote, they'll lose. They have to stop people from voting to win. Now, on the other hand, high turnout can be a bad sign for the incumbent party. When turnout is up, sometimes it's a reaction against the current government. And so we saw that in 2015. So many young people voted that never voted before at levels that we haven't seen young people vote at in forever. And Indigenous people voted way more than they usually do. And the turnout in higher was general, or turnout in general was higher. And so that boded well for the Liberals because they got a lot of young and Indigenous votes, but also because the incumbent party is often the target of that higher turnout. Even in Ontario, we saw this. It was weird. Again, higher turnout generally better for left-leaning parties. But the higher turnout in that election was largely a throw-out Kathleen Wynne turnout. And so the Tories benefited from it. So turnout here is really hard to predict what it'll mean. Does it mean that young people are coming out to vote for people who are progressive? Or does it mean that people are coming out to throw Trudeau out, to throw the bums out? And that we don't know yet.
Okay, Aidan Blum is saying Jagmeet had a strong last month and really good debates. And he also saying that he's did very well on Quebec's Tout le monde en parle.
Yes, yeah. I noted in one of my previous videos that Tout le monde en parle is a make or break moment for a politician. Maybe not for the Bloc, but for everybody else, it's make or break. It's basically, for those who don't know, you can check out my video, but for those who don't know, it's like a Sunday night talk show / variety show / current affairs show where they will have like a panel of regular guests and returning guests who will talk to somebody famous, whether it's a politician or whether it's a celebrity or whether it's an athlete. So for instance, Bianca Andreescu, the US Open champion, was on the same night that Jagmeet was. And so like they talked to Jagmeet and I think the Bloc leader was on that night as well. And it's incredibly important. And Singh did well. Now, he didn't see a direct bump from that, although I think there was a bit of that was part of the slow incline we've been seeing in Quebec in the last couple of weeks. But for Jack Layton, for context, Jack Layton took off because of the strong English debate performance he had, where he destroyed Michael Ignatieff, but also in Quebec specifically, Quebec loved his Tout le monde en parle appearance in 2011. And that was one of the big moments. Now, Singh isn't seeing that jump in Quebec, although the Quebec numbers are getting better. And there are some riding polls indicating that Ruth Ellen Brosseau and Alexandre Boularice, at least, may have a very good chance of keeping their seats. And they may not be the only ones if the numbers continue to improve. Because A lot of the gains are being seen in Ontario and BC, but the gains in Quebec are there. The Leger poll today, for instance, did some Quebec numbers, and what it showed was a 3-point decline for the Liberals and a 3-point gain for the NDP, but a 9-point decline for the Conservatives and a 9-point gain for the Bloc. So the NDP is gaining a little bit, but the problem with Quebec right now is even if they start to like Jagmeet, they might just like Blanchette more. And, if Blanchette does well, it'll be hard for the NDP to win seats in Quebec. The flip side to that, which is good, is a strong Bloc makes a Liberal majority almost impossible, which is a good thing as well. Because if the Bloc wins 30, 35 seats in Quebec, Trudeau's going to have a real hard time winning a majority. Because, the Maritimes, he's going to lose seats in the Maritimes because he was perfect there last time. And he'll gain in Ontario, it looks like, but he was going to lose in the West, and he's not going to gain very much there. And so if he can't make gains in Quebec, he's in big trouble in terms of winning a majority, at least.
Did you appreciate my accent there?
Yes, I did. It was pretty good. Brianna's accent was pretty good, right? Yeah.
Okay. Ryan Williams says, how can we turn Green Party people over to the NDP? May kept saying that the NDP's climate plan is as good as the Greens. Is that true?
Well, I mean, the Greens will argue that we don't have specific numbers in terms of reductions. Now, what we are making the case for is that our plan has been vetted to meet the main goal. So the Greens say we need to reduce our carbon emissions by X percent. I don't know the number. It's somewhere in Elizabeth May's plan. But the other thing she said is 1.5 to stay alive, aka we have to ensure the Earth does not warm by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we stay at 1.5 and under, climate change will be manageable, although I'm sure there will still be real challenges, of course. Singh is saying our plan gets us to the 1.5 threshold, and that's what matters. And he says Elizabeth May herself has said that. It depends on the type of green you're reaching out to. If you want to go with climate, hammer home that the NDP has a climate plan as well, that environmentalists are in disagreement about which plan is better. Be honest with them about that like the Green plan has a lot of supporters, but so does the NDP plan. So it's like you can maybe say to them, look, if you're voting on climate, you sort of have a good choice here. But if they're generally progressives on other issues, that's where I think you can win over those Greens. So if you have somebody who really cares about workers' issues, remind them that the Greens in BC have made it harder to have stopped the NDP from making unionization easier. And the Greens in Ontario voted with Doug Ford to take away the workers' right to strike at the power plants, and on and on and on. You could do that. And whether it's on women's rights, note the Green Party's very confusing position. It's not fair to say that the Green Party doesn't believe in choice, but it is fair to say that they have candidates who have troubling views, and their lack of a whipping policy means that they may have anti-choice candidates, and on and on and on. You might also, if they're caring about diversity, say that while the Greens do have a good gender balance in their candidate slate, and they do have a good amount of LGBTQ peoples, and that's important, the Greens have the least diverse party slate, and that includes the PPC. Only 5% of their candidates are racialized. The NDP, it's like 22. We have the most, right? The NDP has quite a bit. So you should let people know that the Green Party has some good things, and you shouldn't lie about that because people will snap back. They won't believe you. So the Green Party has some good things, but at the end of the day, the NDP sort of matches all of that and exceeds it. And I think that's how you win over Greens. Now, if they're like Green conservatives, I don't know if you can win them over. I think the goal there is like, it's probably better that they're voting Green than voting conservative, and maybe just leave it at that.
Okay. So that atheist bastard said, it's important to remember that Jack Layton won 29 seats in 2008 with just under 18%.
Well, yeah, and that's a big point. Like, so for instance, and this is where I think people are going to have to be reasonable with how we assess this election. And this isn't me managing expectations. I honestly think Jagmeet Singh can still win this thing. If that poll is true, 18, he doesn't have to go. He doesn't have to go too far to start really eating at the Liberals and Tories. It's unlikely, but it's possible. But let's say Jagmeet Singh gets 18, 19, 20%. he might still lose 20 seats in doing that. And I hope that people realize that his performance, even though Mulcair got 19% and 44 seats, that if Singh gets 19% and gets 20 seats, then that's, or 25 seats, then that performance is probably, it isn't worse than Mulcair's. And that, yeah, it's less seats, but like the campaign is better. And I think that's something to realize, that the ND, like, so here's a great example. I was just looking through history a little bit. In 1972, the NDP had the balance of power in Trudeau's second government, which was a minority. And they got about 31 seats. In 1974, there was an election. The NDP lost 2.8% of their vote, and they lost half the caucus. They went from 31 to 16 with 2% lost, almost 3% lost. So keep that in mind, that like the seat count does matter, obviously, but that if we're going to judge this election as something that, if we're going to judge Singh as a guy who deserves another shot or not, just looking at seats alone isn't worth it. We have to look at how he's trending. And if he gets to the high teens, low 20s, and still finishes behind where Mulcair was, I don't think we should necessarily turf him. I think Singh has proven that Canadians are warming up to him, even if this election doesn't end in victory.
Okay, Alibi is asking, is there anything that can track polls for Milton, Ontario? What do people do to find their local poll tracker?
Okay, so one clear thing is, don't look at 338. 338's aggregate is fine. Like, people will debate, is CBC's better or 338's better? They do things differently. But 338 will do this weird thing where they give you like specific numbers at the riding, and those are almost never actual polls. Sometimes those are based in some data. So for instance, they have regional polls, like they base it on, like in Ontario, for instance, during an Ontario election, they'll do an Ontario-wide poll, but then they'll say, okay, but here's the numbers from Eastern Ontario. Here are the numbers from the North. Here are the numbers from the 905. Here are the numbers from, the Niagara region, the Niagara Hamilton. And it'll track all of those and give a rough estimate of what a riding might look like. But those are not polls. The only way you can get those polls is if you're part of a campaign and they have internal polling data, which they may share but may not. It's like it's private information. Or if a firm specifically does a riding poll and releases the information. Now, Main Street, which is, again, historically during this election, has been one of the lowest NDP pollsters. So keep in mind that their riding polls may be underestimating our support, at least the older ones. Unless they've done a poll for your riding, you can only sort of go on general trends. And that's all I can say. Milton, if I'm not mistaken, is Lisa Raitt's riding. That's an interesting one because right now it does look like it's close between the Liberals and Conservatives because Raitt, it's a strong Conservative riding, but Adam Van Couverden, the former Olympian, is running there and he's very popular and he might have a chance of beating Lisa Raitt. But I mean, again, that's all. I think there might have been a riding poll there, but I'm not sure. So do check that. But don't look at aggregates giving you riding polls because they're almost never actual polls.
Okay, Zachary Galvine. Hi, Zachary. Thanks for joining us again. It says, Christo, are you worried that Jagmeet might suffer the Bradley effect?
The Bradley effect? I don't understand. If you could explain what that is, that would be great. Sorry.
Okay. I'll Google that for you and then I'll
okay.
To it.
Okay.
Yeah. So Philip Rottingham says, Christo, one of my friends on Facebook said they've never voted before, but cast their vote for the NDP in this election. That's pretty cool.
I mean, that's fantastic. And like, these are just anecdotes and it's good because like you want these good stories to keep your confidence up. One of the reasons, guys, I started this channel was that no one was saying anything good about the NDP, like anywhere. And I was like the only guy for a long time. And I'm not tooting my own horn here, but when everyone else had given up on Jagmeet, this channel had not given up on Jagmeet. I was critical at times, but always optimistic. And these stories are good to have. And I'll say like another anecdote. One of my older videos on Jagmeet Singh from a few weeks ago has blown up on Facebook. It's just being shared every few minutes now. And if I look at the people who are sharing it, they all have, like, I don't know these people, and I don't even have friends of friends. But if I see their profile pics, a lot of them are young. And that's a good sign if Singh is energizing young people. They might not turn out as much as older people, but if these are new voters, they might not be fully reflected in the traditional polling.
Okay. MTST says Jagmeet actually received a lot of praise from conservative voters on his Twitter account. People have said that Singh has given them cause to reconsider their usual vote.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the conservative, there's a narrative in Canada that, like, okay, liberals can switch to conservatives and NDP, but NDPers can only switch to liberals, and the conservatives can only switch to liberals. And then, so you have to go from conservative to liberal to NDP. But that's just not true. First of all, there's lots of parts of the country where the conservatives and the NDP compete with one another. Places like Oshawa, for instance, and many ridings in the prairies where they're like, it's like people vote NDP or conservative in some of those parts of the country. And so, this narrative that the NDP succeeding can only win over liberals and Greens and can't win over conservatives is just not true. It's just not true. Now, it is harder to flip conservative voters because they are more assured of them. They're more assured in their vote. If you look at pollsters, they'll say, okay, if your first choice is conservative, how likely are you to switch your vote? And NDPers and liberals and Greens are always more likely to switch than conservatives. But conservatives often put the NDP, not too far off the liberals in their second choice. And some pollsters say that conservatives are most likely to switch to the NDP. And a lot of conservatives, they might vote conservative, but it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have our values. Like, maybe on social issues, sometimes they're conservative. But if you go to a conservative and you say, do you think the very wealthiest in our society could pay a little bit more? And surveys have shown that a majority of conservatives support a wealth tax along the lines of the NDP's wealth tax. Also, it should be noted that, like, a lot of these people believe in community. They believe in solidarity. They express it differently, but there's no reason why a message about economic fairness and justice can appeal to conservatives and liberals and Greens and, Bloc Québécois people as well. So, yeah, flipping conservatives is the hardest vote to flip because they're very loyal to their party, but it can happen, and it has happened, and it will happen at least somewhat.
Okay, I Googled the Bradley effect.
Okay.
The Bradley effect, less commonly the Wilder effect, is a theory concerning observed discrepancies between voter opinion polls and election outcomes in some United States government elections where a white candidate and a non-white candidate run against each other. So Zachary was asking whether or not you felt that Jagmeet might fall victim to this.
I mean, that's an interesting question, right? That's an interesting question because I don't know, because I can't. Jagmeet, that's an interesting question because I don't know if the data can be carried over Canada to the United States. I don't know if similar studies have been done about racialized candidates in Canada. I know we don't have as many. Another factor is that in U.S. elections, like generals especially, are almost always like 1v1. In Canada, we don't have that. We have a 6-person contest here. And so that factor matters as well. I'm not sure if there's a Bradley effect, especially because Singh's numbers are rising. You might be right in noting that, some people say they're voting for Jagmeet because they want to sound like they're saying the right thing, but then they're going to go into the polling booth and vote for the white guy again, as they always do. That could be the case. But then nothing that wouldn't explain why Singh has gone in some polls from 7 to 14. Let's say there is a 1 or 2% Bradley effect. It's still the case that Singh's numbers are rising in spite of that. And I think that's important to note. So I don't want to speculate further, but even if there is a Bradley effect, the numbers are rising within that framework, even if it does exist.
Okay, Adam Blum is saying the Bloc is gaining quite a bit of steam after how well Blanchette performed at the debates.
Yeah, no, the Bloc is doing very well in this election. Whether or not you like him or agree with him, Bloc is doing very well. They're almost certainly going to keep party status now, pending an absolute or regain party status, because they lost it in 2011 and didn't get it in 2015, and they have a chance to get it back now. And that'll give them a bigger voice in parliament. The NDP looks very likely to keep party status right now, given that Singh is on the rise. So that will be an interesting parliament where there'll be 4 parties with party status in this coming election, which will, give a greater diversity of voices in the parliament. And again, as I noted, the consequences of that for the NDP are likely that some of our bloc-oriented seats are going to be very hard to keep. We might lose them. On the other hand, the Liberals are going to lose seats to the bloc as well, and maybe even the Conservatives, depending on how strong the bloc is. And so there's a good hope from my perspective that while the bloc rising prevents an orange wave, which is unfortunate, like a Jack Layton style orange wave, for that to happen, like the bloc needs to be destroyed almost, right? Which is what happened almost in 2011. On the other hand, the stronger the bloc is, the lower the chances are of a Liberal majority. And we've already talked about on this channel how a Conservative majority is very unlikely because of, their vote being so heavily invested in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So if all of their votes are clustered in rural areas and in a couple provinces, a majority is going to be hard for them. And if the Liberals' core base in Quebec goes to the bloc, a majority will be hard for them. And I think that's crucial. Giving Jagmeet Singh, a caucus of, 15, 25, whatever MPs, but with the balance of power, could be much more impactful than Tom Mulcair's 44 people last time.
Okay, Craig Adolphi, thanks for joining us again, Craig. Good to see you. Said, how satisfying would it be for the NDP to beat the Conservatives in Quebec?
I mean, it would be great. It would be great. I think the numbers are rising. They're good. The Léger numbers have shown that we're trending upwards, that we're in the mid-teens in more and more polls instead of 7 or 8 where we were, again, for much of the campaign, for much of the summer. I think that Green vote in Quebec is going to bleed, and I think some of it might bleed back to us, which is great. And I think that the good thing in Quebec right now is that it doesn't look like a wipeout is happening. That if we can keep Boularice and we can keep Brosseau, there was a riding poll done in Caron's riding, which had him in 3rd, which is very concerning, but that was done before any of the Singh upswing started. But if we can keep Caron and we can keep Brosseau and we can keep Boularice and maybe a couple others in places like Montreal, then, Singh can not only count on gains in Ontario and BC, but not lose the entire Quebec base while doing it. And that'll be seen as a successful election, I think. And I think that that'll give us a base to vote on. And here's the thing. Quebecers love Bill 21. And Quebecers, more than the average English Canadian, I'm not trying to be discriminatory against Quebecers here, seem to have an issue with the turban. They do. But I bet you that if Singh has a decent performance this time and comes back to them in 2 years, if it's a minority government, they will be willing to give him more of a shot than they did this time. I really believe that. I really do. They will know him now. Jack Layton, again, got almost no love from Quebec for the majority of his time as leader. Remember, we won a by-election by Mulcair. What was that, 2007, 2008? But, 2011 was the first time Jack Layton got any love at all in Quebec. Any love at all. And so I think Jagmeet will have the chance to really win them over if he gets a second chance. And I think that's if he can keep some seats in Quebec. And that looks likely. That looks likely right now.
Okay, Aiden's asking, how is the fight to take back Paul Duar's old seat going? You don't want seats holding Liberal for more than one term. It's harder to flip them in the future.
No, that's a good point. We just hit 100. That's pretty exciting. That's a 3rd straight stream where we hit 100, guys. Thanks again for coming by. Again, there's been some riding polls there, again, suggesting the NDP are in 3rd. But frankly, again, Main Street had been underestimating our totals for far too long. That riding is a liberal NDP swing riding, and we have a very strong candidate there. And Catherine McKenna, I have to say, has been really disappointing as environment minister. And I think a lot of voters in Ottawa Centre, which is an educated, informed, progressive riding, are going to be willing to throw their vote to the NDP. They're going to know that the Conservatives aren't really a threat there. And I think Emily Taman is a great candidate, very accomplished. I think more accomplished than Catherine McKenna, and she's been a cabinet minister. I think she'd be a fantastic alternative. And I don't think you should discount the fact that Joel Hardin in the Ontario NDP election last summer built a massive machine. And I know that machines don't always cross over federally, provincially 100%, but the hundreds of people, like the maybe thousands, like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people that Joel Hardin energized into politics, a lot of those people are working with Emily right now. And so I would say that, like, there's a lot of wild cards in Ottawa Center. I don't know how it's going to go, but I think we got a chance of flipping that one back. And again, all of this is like when the numbers are at where we're polling at the CBC polling average at 14 or so. But what if the polls start moving towards 18? What if, like, all the polls start following Leger, and next week, say 5 days from now, the NDP CBC polling average is 17? Well, then it's a different ball game, and all of these close ridings come into play. One, because, you know, the way the politics work is that, you know, when you gain percentages, more and more ridings just mathematically start falling your way. But the narratives will start to change. And as the NDP becomes stronger, as we see with Jagmeet Singh, more and more people are willing to talk to you. The local candidates are already hearing this. Here in Kingston, I've spoken to the people here in Kingston. We're getting more volunteers. We're getting more fundraising. We're getting more interest locally here because of Jagmeet's recent success. It's starting to happen, and it will matter in close ridings.
Okay, another question from Aiden, who's like a top commenter tonight.
We got a lot of great commenters.
I know. He says, when is the NDP going to get the platform costed by the PBO? It's been out since June, so there's no excuse.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the mechanics are of that. I don't know if we've submitted it or what have you. The NDP has had a costed platform longer than most parties. We've put out costs. We've also put out financial statements about our desire to raise taxes. I don't know what the process is with the PBO. I don't know if it's been submitted and we're waiting. All I do know is that, you know, the NDP has been transparent with their platform, and that's great to see. If they have submitted something to the PBO, we'll see soon. Hopefully it goes well. If it doesn't, that could stall some momentum, which is unfortunate. On the other hand, a good stamp of approval from Kevin Page and not his PBO and these the independent analysts could cause an even further boost. But I don't even know if people really care about that. I mean, the Greens numbers have fallen, but they didn't take a special hit when their costed platform was ripped apart. I don't know if it matters that much to people.
Okay, Dan Corriban says, will the PCs take the seats in the Maritimes, or can the NDP make inroads and take seats from Liberals?
Well, the Conservatives will win seats back in the Maritimes. It's a guarantee. There are some seats the Liberals won that are like 50-year Conservative seats, and they only won them by a couple points. So you have to remember that it's like when the Liberals beat the Conservatives by like 8 or 9% last time. And so you have to wonder, the ridings where the Liberals beat the Conservatives by a few dozen or 100 votes and yet beat them by 9% in the general polls, when the Liberals are effectively tied with the Conservatives, all those ridings are going back to the Tories, almost all of them. So the Tories are going to win a majority of the seats in New Brunswick. They're going to win a couple back in Nova Scotia. They're going to win some back in PEI, I would wager. They have a new popular PC government. Newfoundland, likely not. The NDP, I would say, has two big chances to get seats back. One is in St. John's East. That is a riding we just barely lost last time. And we have the candidate running again, Jack Harris, and he's very popular. And Seamus O'Regan is a terrible, terrible MP. He's the one who's bungled the Indigenous Affairs file in the last year or so. He didn't visit Grassy Narrows, for instance, and, you know, he's awful. He's awful. And then, and so that one's a good one to flip back potentially. And another option is Halifax. Halifax, the Metro Halifax riding, the urban riding is one that can be flipped back if the polls look good. Very, very outside chance. Acadie Bathurst, where Yvon Godin had his old seat, could be flipped. But New Brunswick doesn't look good for us in the aggregate polling right now. New Brunswick and PEI show that the Greens continue to poll strongly there, although not strong enough to win a seat. So I would say the NDP has a chance of picking up a couple, but any Liberal losses in the Maritimes, for the most part, will likely go blue, at least this election.
Okay, Lisa Hildebrandt says, I fear the Alberta NDP are going to ruin the chances for our federal NDP candidates. They are refusing to have their photos taken with them, including her local candidate.
Yeah, Rachel Notley needs to chill. I am not happy with Rachel. I'm not going to say what I really think in the way I really think it because I don't want to swear and call somebody names. But Rachel Notley is eminently disappointing right now. And like, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. But again, like it's incredibly disappointing and frustrating and infuriating how she has performed as leader in terms of her lack of solidarity with our party and her commitment to ecocide. Like I can't endorse Rachel Notley right now. I gave her the benefit of the doubt in the provincial election because she was the best of bad options, but she never supported the BC NDP when she ran in 2015, sent staff and resources to help her. And then when the flip side came in 2017, she didn't do the same. When we had an academic, there's a book up here. When we had an academic conference to celebrate, right here, this one right here, Party of Conscience. You might have read it. When we had a conference there to pro NDP academics, very pro NDP, to have a conference about the past, present, and future of our party, staff were told they were not allowed to attend our thing because at one of the sessions, only one, Avi Lewis was there, and he is associated with the LEAP. So staff were banned from our academic conference. I'm done with Rachel Notley and her betrayal of our party. I don't know what the solution is. The only solace is we only have one Alberta seat. I don't know. My hope is that, Linda Duncan, I know she's not running again, but I hope that people know that Linda Duncan long represented the people of Edmonton Strathcona really well and can do a good job, and that her successor will be a good torchbearer for progressive politics. But I don't know what Rachel Notley's MO is here. It's certainly not being a team player.
Okay, Ryan William. How good is Singh going to be at debating in his first major when he looked right at home?
Singh's been really good. So he's done 3 debates. He's the only one. Him and Scheer are the only one to have done all 3. The first one, Trudeau skipped, and the Bloc and the PPC weren't invited. The second one, the PPC wasn't invited, and the Greens weren't invited. And then the third one, everyone was there. I think Singh won all 3 debates, or at least in the first French debate, he was second after Blanchette. It was close. In the first debate, he was the best. He was nervous, though, in the McLean's debate. I don't know if you guys remember. He did really well, but I felt he was nervous. In the French one, I still think he was a little nervous because it was his first French debate, but he did well. Here, he was like in top form. He was ready. He was loose. He was seasoned. He was ready. And whereas the other ones, I thought he did well. This one, it's like, yeah, he absolutely dominated. I don't know if you guys saw my video, but there was that data from the people who do the Political Compass. They asked like 4,200 people, like minute by minute, how are you feeling? And by the end of the night, every other leader, all 5 of the other leaders, had made more people angry than happy. And Singh, his numbers were literally like off the chart. And I think that, if you look, almost every other party's partisans, supported their person first, but only Jagmeet Singh got significant amounts of support in terms of saying who won from all the other parties, even PPCers. Like even a good chunk of PPCers were like, yeah, this Jagmeet guy clearly won. And new polling today suggests from other pollsters, not as adamantly, but that Jagmeet Singh won the debate, that he won, and that people from other parties suggest so. People from the Greens, for instance, in some numbers I saw this afternoon, I think it's from campaign, I forget who it's from. It might have been from Forum. I'm not sure who it's from. Suggested that more Greens thought Singh won than May. Greens said their own leader was outperformed by our guy. And Trudeau only, among Liberals, Trudeau only beat Singh by like a handful of points. Something's happening here, folks. Something's happening.
Okay, Jonathan Castles has a question about how polling translates into seats.
Yeah.
So he says a crazy seat count change from a minor vote percent change. How is that possible? I thought first past the post was super stable.
Well, I don't know if you're being sarcastic. First past the post is not stable. So let's put it this way. Let's say, like, for simplicity's purpose, a proportional system. You get 100 seats. Every time a vote flips You lose 1%, you gain a seat, or you lose a seat by percentage. So a 5% shift is 5 seats. But in this system, 5% could literally be doubling or having your vote.
Oh, he says it's 100% sarcasm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you know the deal, right? System's not at all stable. The reason why that's happening, it could be various reasons. Let's say the NDP goes up by 0.5%, but the bloc goes up by 2 points in a poll. That could mean that while our vote stayed the same, we might lose a bunch of seats because the bloc took some from us. Or vice versa, the NDP could go down in a poll and gain seats because the Liberals went down by more, and that's a factor. Another factor with these polls that you have to consider, and a good polling aggregator and a good pollster that gives a seat projection in addition to their numbers, will look at regionality. Let's say the Conservatives gain 2 points tomorrow in a poll, but the entirety of that gain is isolated in places they're already strong. It might only translate into 1 or 2 more seats. But let's say the NDP gains 2 points tomorrow in a poll, but they gain 4 in Ontario. That should translate into many, many seats potentially, maybe say 6, 10 seats, because a 4% bump in Ontario, if it comes from, say, the Liberals especially, would mean that ridings like Toronto Danforth and Parkdale High Park and Beaches East York and a lot of the downtown ridings will start flipping our way more likely. And I think that's why you can see big jumps with small fluctuations. It's what's happening with all the parties in aggregate, and it's also what's happening at the regional level, where the changes can be more drastic. This is one thing to be careful with polls, especially if it's like a 1,000 sample size. 1,000 sample size isn't bad. The limit of it, though, is when you start looking at regionality. The regional subset of, say, the Maritimes in a 1,000 person poll might be like 80 people, 100 people. And if that's the case, the margins of error at the regional levels will be very high. So you might have a poll that all of a sudden has the NDP at 17 in the Maritimes, which would be great, but the margin might be plus or minus 6. And so it's like you don't know if it's real or if it's not, right? And so that's another factor to look at. Regional numbers can be very volatile in polls, and that can explain somewhat the big jump or big decline in seats.
Okay. Sorry, Jonathan. Sarcasm is hard to read over questions, so I think I probably read your question wrong there. So something from Cam Shima. The issue is not how Singh is trending. It's great to see that he's trending well, but that does not translate into seats. The reality is vetting was a disaster and candidates are being given weeks to campaign.
I mean, look, that's like the vetting could have been better. The vetting could have been better. It could have been faster. But some of the challenges are always what we face with the NDP. We should have been faster, but not a whole lot faster, I have to believe, because we built a slate of candidates that reflects the diversity of this country, and we're the only party in the history of this country to do that. Even the NDP 4 years ago didn't do that, for being honest. This NDP is the first party in the history of this country, even comparing other NDPers, I believe, to actually run a slate that reflects the diversity. Maybe the Ontario NDP last time had a good chunk of racialized people, for instance, running for us. But the team we have is a great team. I do agree that if we were a bit faster, we'd get a bit more of an advantage. And you're right that Singh's personal numbers do not automatically translate into seats. But as I noted from the top, as Craig noted at one of the first comments, he just said 18%. Leger has us up 4, the Liberals down 3, the Conservatives down 3 at 18%. And this is, I think, following the general trend, which is that we're moving up. And you're right. Singh being popular is not in and of itself, percentages on the poll sheet, which is not in and of itself seats. But it's a good trend to have. And I think you're going to start seeing polls move that way. And again, campaign research, they've suggested Singh is on the move, and they're going to have data later this week. Other pollsters are confirming that there's going to be some movement for the NDP. Nanos hasn't shown it yet, but I do think that their numbers are going to come. And when the pre-debate days fall off the back end, you might see a spike in Nanos. So I think you have to be patient a little bit. Leader approval ratings can be a lagging indicator. They don't have to be, but they can be.
Okay, Cosmic Marlin says, would you support mass protests in favor of electoral reform and the abolition of the Senate?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, I would certainly probably go to some demonstrations. I don't know if people would be ready for a mass protest. I wouldn't oppose a mass protest. I mean, I support the climate strikes, I support worker strikes, I support, protests against austerity and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think electoral reform is probably more important than Senate abolition is right now. One, Senate abolition is going to be extremely difficult. It will require all provinces agreeing. At the same time, they'll all have to agree. Every single one will have to agree to it. Senate reform, whatever that means, might just require the 750 rule, which is seven of the provinces, each when total comprise 50% or more of the population. That's what you need. Abolition, though, requires unanimity. I don't know if you'll get that, and I don't know if the political capital invested is worth it. What is important, though, and which does not require constitutional reform, is electoral reform. As long as you do not disturb the weight of votes between provinces, which means that the proportionality can't cross provinces. You can't, for example, make PEI's votes have to count within a pool with Ontario. That wouldn't be allowed. But as long as proportionality is done in a manner that preserves the balance of votes between the provinces, then you can do it with a simple act of parliament. That's where the focus has to be. Electoral reform. The Senate, I mean, that's not something that can be dealt with very easily. Not in the short term. Electoral reform is much more achievable and more important.
Nurple G says Jagmeet's followers on Twitter have increased over 40,000 since the start of the election, which is pretty cool.
That's very good. That's very good. I mean, it's fantastic. And big names too. Big names too.
Okay, this is kind of sort of like a question we discussed earlier, but
That's okay.
I think it's worth repeating.
For sure.
Fully Automated said, I saw on Twitter during the debate a lot of conservatives saying they would never vote NDP but love Jagmeet and wished he was an NDP. We might be getting a few votes from that crowd, question mark.
Yeah, I think so. Look, there's a couple other good indicators. Abacus, before when Singh's numbers were starting to improve, but before it really kicked, before this Singh upswing really started to kick into gear, was noting a couple important things, which is that, yeah, Singh's personal numbers were up, but the NDP was rising amongst people's second choice. Angus Reid noted this as well, that people who are going to switch are more and more likely now to select the NDP as that party. Now, again, second place support doesn't matter in our system. We don't have ranked ballots. You only get support from the people who vote for you. It doesn't matter that they go into the polling booth and they have you in their heart or in their mind as their number two. But it does mean that with Scheer and Trudeau both being unpopular, and with Scheer and Trudeau both systemically lying to Canadians about character issues, and with both of their parties not really offering anything inspiring to Canadians, I think people are looking for something else. And for a while, it looked like Elizabeth May was going to be that. Everyone was talking about the Greens. And maybe in Quebec, that something else is the Bloc. But everywhere else, it seems like Singh could be that guy. And I think that's where the opening's coming from. That's where the opening's coming from. And I wouldn't be surprised if many conservatives come over to us, and also liberals and also Greens.
Okay, Brown Socialist says, socialism as a political force is almost non-existent in Canada. Even the NDP almost has no socialist trace left. And Amy Ames notes that the NDP removed socialism from the preamble to the preamble in 1415.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the preamble change is something I disagreed with. I still disagree with it. I've written about that closer to the time it happened. I'm not a fan of that. I like the old preamble. It's not even the word socialism that bothers me. It was the removal of the commitment to social ownership, to the production for use instead of profit, and to the abolition of poverty. So the word socialism is still in there. That's not the point. The word democratic socialist is in there, and the word socialism is in there. But the point is they took out that commitment to non-profit oriented systems of production. That's the much less celebrated or maligned part, but the much more important part. Totally agree with you. In terms of socialism, I mean, in terms of encouraging the worker and collective and democratic ownership of the means of production, there's not a whole lot in this platform. I totally agree with you. But in terms of reinvigorating a sense of class conflict, there is a lot. And I think that's a good first step. For instance, I want, more than a commitment to cap cell phone and internet prices. I want us to nationalize a telecommunications firm. But you can't always get what you want. This is the best platform on offer to the left. And this is one that will push the Overton window to a way where socialism will become more palatable again. That's encouraging.
Okay, guys, I'm just reorganizing some of the questions, but if I skipped yours, I'm going to go back. Vahop says, hasn't there been some controversy within the NDP where NDP's socialist branch has said that their candidates have been unfairly not chosen as candidates?
There have been some rumors about that. Some of that is based on the vetting complications. Some of that is based on egos. Some of that is based on the fact that, okay, like even Paul Manley, the current Green MP, who everyone says was booted because of Palestine. I actually don't know if it was Palestine. If it was, we made the wrong choice. I've noted that on the channel. If Paul Manley was prevented from running for us in the last election because of his views on Israel and Palestine, then that was wrong, and it's our fault. And it's our fault that we don't have that seat anymore that Paul Manley holds. But some people also suggest that the reason he wasn't vetted is for other things. But the party doesn't disclose why someone was or was not vetted. They don't do that. I've heard rumors, and again, these are rumors, that he has certain conspiracy theories. And let's just say, without me saying anything in particular, that this is a conspiracy theory held by no fewer than, say, 5 Greens right now. Something about steel beams and whatnot, right? And so a candidate could have good views, and they could say that they have good views and that they were booted because those good views challenged the political status quo, and that may be true. But it could also mean that they have allegations of domestic violence in their past. Or it could mean that, they've written something troubling on the internet, like, in a way that's unbecoming, that is discordance with our values. And so I'm not trying to suggest that the party hasn't buried people before because of their socialist views, but I am suggesting that at least some of those people were also just bad candidates. And so, like, it's hard to tell what was what, like, if I'm being honest. So I don't want to comment on any specific instances. What I can tell you this time, though, is that I don't think that's true in this instance, because there are a ton of left-wing people running. Sven Robinson's running. Leah Gazan's running. Matthew Green is running. Like, there are people who have taken open, Jessa McLean is running again, who have taken open socialist stances, openly pro-Palestinian stances very critical of the party leadership. And they're still in, and they're still running. And some of them are in very good ridings. Like, they're not paper candidates that you're burying away. Like, Matthew Green's running in Hamilton Center. If they wanted to bury left-wing people, they wouldn't have allowed him that what should be a safe seat.
Maybe it's because the Socialist Caucus are jerks and just yell at everyone.
I mean, maybe it's because the Socialist Caucus are jerks and still yell.
Okay. Paul Q says, can you define economic justice?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I would suggest that my view is that economic justice is that everyone has basically the same. That's my view. Like, I mean, my view is more radical than most people. I would suggest that in terms of wealth and income, that the top person, in terms of their wealth and income, would have no more than 10 times the lowest person. And I would suggest that we would have something approaching a maximum wage and a 100% tax on income/wealth after a certain point. I don't know where that point is, but that would be my view. My general view is that you should not be allowed to have a level of wealth that perpetuates itself intergenerationally, that creates inequalities of opportunity. Because here's the thing, equality of opportunity in Canada does not exist. It doesn't. This narrative that in Canada or the United States you can succeed if you work hard enough is a lie. It's like the founding lie of our country, besides the fact that, the other founding lie or the other founding tragedy, the other founding crime is how we've treated Indigenous people. But the founding lie of our country is that equality of opportunity exists. It's because equality of opportunity cannot exist without economic equality. It doesn't have to be total equality, but it has to be effectively total. That's my view, ultimately. But like, again, is that on the ballot? No. And I don't expect it to be.
Okay, Ryan Williams says, how in the world did Bernier get into the debate?
Okay, so here's how that worked. So historically, there's always been controversies because it's like, yeah, the NDP, liberals, and conservatives are always in. And when the bloc had party status, they were always in too. So it's like all the official parties are invited. But then it was like, okay, so what about the Greens? For a long time, the Greens never had a seat, or they had one seat, but they had like 6 or 7 or 8% nationally, and their leader was well known. And so it was like, well, what do we do? And so this time they came up with a criteria. I made a video about this. If you look, like, Bernier shouldn't be included, go check that video out after the stream. You can go check it out. The criteria are three. We're basically three. One, and you got to meet two of the three. Any two of the three. One, you needed to show that you were going to run candidates in 90% of the ridings or more, and the People's Party was going to do that. Two, you had to demonstrate you had to have won at least one seat historically under that party's name. So Bernier, because the People's Party was created after an election and there was no by-election, Bernier could not count under that. Or historically, your party polled above 5 or 6 or 7%. Again, that doesn't apply to new parties. So you think, okay, the system's unfair to new parties. Not quite. Because if you can demonstrate the ability to win multiple seats, not just one, but multiple seats, then you can be in. And the commission would pay for polling to help you prove that. Now, all of that was fine. Like, I agree with Jagmeet that Bernier shouldn't have been on the stage because his views are harmful. But like, let's also understand that, it's hard to ban parties from official debates. It's hard. So all of that was set out. I thought it was a fair process. The polling was done, and how they did it is where I disagree. They asked people in ridings selected by the PPC, would you consider voting for the PPC? Not will you, not are you, not might you, not are you likely to, but will you loosely consider it? And if they got over 20 some, 30 some percent in certain ridings, they were counted as they can win here. But that was BS. Like, there were some ridings where it's like, yeah, 30% of people will consider voting for you, but the Tories won that riding handily last time. They're not going to lose it. So to me, Bernier would have had to demonstrate that, okay, I can consider it fair that he will win his seat, or is likely to, or it's possible. So there's one. So you got to prove in the other 337 ridings, can you win another? And he would have had to show me, is there a poll putting one of your candidates in first in another riding, or in second, or maybe in third, but within, say, 5 or 10% of the leadership, within the margin of error? And there was no such poll. So I felt that the commission, not wanting to exclude him, not wanting the controversy, did what they could to put him in. But at the end of the day, I disagree with the assertion that they had demonstrated viability beyond Bernier's riding. But that was the rationale, whether you agree or not.
Okay, the hub says, are the 338 numbers for Singh's riding wrong? Like, is there any chance he doesn't get his seat? It shows him only a few percent higher than others.
Yeah, see, the 338 numbers are wrong. They're not wrong necessarily, but they're not actual polls. You have to look at a few factors here. One, Singh won that back when people didn't like Singh, and back when the NDP's numbers were in the toilet, and back when literally everything but this YouTube channel pretty much was anti-Jagmeet, and some of David Dole's videos, to be fair, was anti-Jagmeet Singh, because the left hated Singh, the right hated Singh, the center hated Singh, everyone hated Singh. He won that riding by like 14 points. Now, the Greens didn't run there, and so maybe the Greens take some of our vote. But all of that fails to recognize that Singh continues to rise in the polls, his numbers and the party's numbers. And so I think that it's very, very unlikely he's going to lose his seat. That's my view, especially because the numbers in BC specifically continue to look strong. It's like the national numbers, the numbers in Quebec don't matter to that as much. So I don't think he's going to lose a seat. I really don't.
Okay, the Great Dominion says, I've heard the CPC's objective for Quebec is to hold what they have now, including Bernier's seat, and pick up 2 additional seats in the Quebec area. Does Bernier doesn't have a seat for the CPC, does he?
No, but I think what he's suggesting is that that Bernier seat will, like, they'll fill it with the new Conservative candidate, which that one's going to be a close one. Bernier's seat is going to be a close one. He can win it. I might see. I don't even want to make a prediction. It's gonna be a tight one. But yeah, I think you're right in noting that the Conservatives don't have a lot of high hopes in Quebec right now. The Bloc's rise will hurt growth potential. Andrew Scheer is not very popular in Quebec. He did not have a strong French debate performance. And unless he has a really good one tomorrow, I don't know if many gains will be possible. The hope the Conservatives need is that the rise of the Bloc and all of those complicated mathematics lead to them winning some narrow ridings. But I think the Conservatives will find it very difficult to make gains in Quebec. I really do. I think the Conservatives' path to victory, a majority right now looks very unlikely, is picking up some seats in the Maritimes, not losing too much in Ontario, growing, like they already have a lot of seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but gaining there and in rural Manitoba, and then at the end of the day, hoping the Liberals lose enough seats to the Bloc in Quebec to take them down a peg. That's where the Conservatives, I think that's their path to a minority government.
Okay, Travis Palmer says, imagine though if Bernie gets elected in 2020 and it's the states, not us, that received optical and dental care. What a sad day that would be for us Canadians.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I've noted that on some of my videos that it's like, the Americans got to stop. They got to realize that it's like Bernie Sanders isn't fighting for what we have, because Bernie Sanders has better vision than that. Bernie Sanders is fighting for something better than Canada's healthcare. He's fighting for a single payer, but a single payer that includes some of the things we want. So yeah, my hope is that Bernie wins. My hope is that Jagmeet wins, and that we can have truly good healthcare on both sides of the border for the first time ever. That'd be fantastic.
Lisa Hildebrand says, Christo, you are literally having a mind meld with me regarding Rachel Notley. She is horrible.
I mean, look, I can give her a lot of credit for winning that election. And she did some good things, like the $15. Alberta right now is the only province with $15. BC is going to get there soon, but they're the only province at $15 an hour. So she did some good stuff. And I know she's working in a conservative province, so she's limited by that. But at the end of the day, like how she's approached things in the last year or so, saying Singh doesn't care about working class people, that's a lie. Rachel Notley is buying into this right-wing myth that you're only a working class person if you are a blue collar oil worker man. But working class people are most likely to be women in the service sector who work as cashiers and as waitresses and in childcare facilities. Those are the working class, more than the relatively small proportion of men that work in the oil industry, right? And so Rachel Notley's assertion that like Jagmeet doesn't care about workers because he won't fight for an ecocidal pipeline is a lie. Singh's the only leader federally that stood for the right to strike. He's the only leader federally that's fighting for a federal $15 minimum wage. He's the only leader federally that's fighting to make it so that workers can't have their pensions stolen to pay for CEO golden parachutes. He's the only leader who's been, giving real, support to workers who have lost their jobs due to outsourcing. He's the only leader that wants to fight for meaningful labor protections under NAFTA. So like Rachel Notley she's just lying about our party. And I can't deal with it. I hope you Albertans find a better leader who and soon.
To be fair to Notley, though, she is in a very difficult position. And while she has made decisions, particularly on the political side regarding the federal NDP that, we're not happy with, she did in fact form government, and she did fight for the working people of Alberta. And she had a really tough go of it. So she deserves a little bit of credit.
She deserves a little bit of credit. Yes, a little bit of credit.
Okay. Quinn M says, hello. How can we remind Canadians to vote with others in mind and not just vote for themselves?
I mean, I think that's an important question. One thing I've noted on this channel is that young people seem to be falling behind Jagmeet Singh. They like him. And so before the Singh upswing really took off, there was Nanos was showing that Singh was taking off specifically amongst people 18 to 29. And what I noted on the channel then was, look, if you really care about your children and your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, your younger brothers and sisters or cousins or what have you, look at what they want from politics and vote in their interests. And I think it's like, if you go to some boomers and you say to them, or you go to some, older folks and you say to them, like, your kids don't have benefits at work. Your kids have crazy student loans. Your kids don't have stable jobs. And one election isn't going to fix everything. It's not. But the NDP, for instance, wants to create a pharmacare plan. And so your son or daughter, who when they turn 25 won't have their teeth covered or their medicines covered because their job doesn't provide benefits, because so many young people today do not have benefits at their job. Well, now they'll have dental care, and now they'll have pharmacare, but they'll only have it if the NDP takes power. Or your son or daughter who can't afford to pay to get out from under their student loans because of a debt spiral, say Jagmeet Singh will cancel student loan interest, meaning that no student will ever be trapped by an ever-growing pile of debt. Say to them that if you care about your children's future and the future of young people, the NDP is the party fighting for it. It's a new deal for young people. And I think that's a crucial message, and I think something to consider.
Okay, Mr. Burke says, Jagmeet needs to blast the Conservatives way more, not just Trudeau, even though owning the Liberals is quite fun.
Singh, I don't agree. Trudeau is blasting, Singh is blasting Trudeau because he deserves to be blasted, but Singh, more than any other leader, has blasted the Conservatives, at least in a fair way. Trudeau's done it, but a lot of it's been unfair, I think. Like, too many references to Doug Ford. Like, references to Doug Ford are fair, but Scheer was actually right in saying that Trudeau's not running for Premier of Ontario, he's running for Prime Minister. And so he spends too much time talking about Doug Ford. Jagmeet Singh, on the other hand, is the only leader, I'll repeat that, the only leader to swear off cooperation with Andrew Scheer. He's the only one. Elizabeth May, she'd happily work with Scheer. Justin Trudeau has not said he wouldn't work with Scheer. Neither has the Bloc. You know what I mean? Like, the NDP is the only party to say the Conservatives are so bad, I will not even hypothetically cooperate with them. We have attacked the Conservatives deeply. And of course, it should be remembered that Justin Trudeau cowered away for that first debate, hid away because he didn't want to face his others. And so he left the dirty work of opposing Andrew Scheer, of opposing his backwards ideology. He left that work to Jagmeet Singh. And Jagmeet Singh did Trudeau's job for him. So I actually don't fully agree that the NDP needs to attack the Conservatives more. I think we are attacking them at an appropriate level, and we're the ones doing it most stridently, most genuinely, and most effectively.
Okay, Craig Adolphi says, I think it'll be important to see who wins before we decide how representative we're being with our nominations. A lot of parties put women or people of color into losing seats, and they don't support them and push them out of the way when the seats are viable.
100%. Very true. Most parties do that. Our party does that too. If I'm being honest, I know of instances where people have been asked because they fit equity groups, like, hey, do you want to run in this loser riding? No one's going to win. And the party were honest with them, to be fair. But I know this. I've heard this from NDP peoples, if you will. That's my way of saying it. So I know that. But I will say that we have some evidence that, at least as far as gender goes, the NDP is a bit different. In the recent Ontario election, the NDP elected a caucus of 40 people, gender equal pretty much right down the line. In BC as well, and in Alberta as well, they elected a huge chunk of women, showing that at least on gender, that yes, while a lot of the loser ridings are used for equity stats, the reality is that the NDP runs women at least in very winnable ridings. We do that. Because again, if it was the case that we only ran minorities and women and other marginalized people in loser ridings, then the Ontario caucus would not be as diverse as it is right now. It's got the Ontario NDP is the first party to form a black caucus because we elected enough black people to do it. If we put black people, if we only had black people running in loser ridings, we wouldn't have had that. So like, yes, 100% true, but the NDP runs people of color in winnable ridings. Indigenous people are running in winnable ridings. Leah Gazan, Rudy Turtle, Matthew Green, and an Afro-Canadian running in a winnable riding. LGBTQ people running in winnable ridings. Like, this is not a joke, right? So yes, but also I think we're a bit different.
Okay, Alibi says, I turn 18 on Friday and I don't know if I should vote NDP or Green. Try not to be biased.
Well, I mean, it depends what you want. It depends what you want. Again, on this channel, I am like a biased guy. 100%. I own my bias. I am like an NDP hack in a sense, although I am critical of the party from the left. Now, I won't tell you how to vote or how to arrive at your vote. So what matters to you is going to affect things. For instance, are you a strategic voter? I'm not. I don't like strategic voting, but if you are, then it's like, okay, where do you live? Which one of those two parties has a better chance of winning? Which one of those two parties has a better chance of holding the balance of power at the federal level? And unless you're in a few key ridings, the answer to both of those questions is the NDP. Now, it's like, do you value climate change? Both of those parties have something to offer. But does one party have a better plan? Are you, say, worried about climate change, but you're worried about the position of workers in a green economy? The NDP are 100% better. Do you want a basic income? The Greens are offering that. And whether you like a basic income or not is a debate. The NDP aren't, so you might vote Green. Or are you concerned about Indigenous people and racialized people? I would say the NDP are more important because the Greens have shown, I think, a real lack of awareness at best on those issues. So, it's hard for me to answer a question like that for you without knowing the specifics of how you approach politics. But I mean, consider all of those factors.
Okay, so there was a lot of conversation about the federal NDP versus the provincial NDP for Alberta, and the fact that Jagmeet Singh seems to be prioritizing policies for Quebec and BC and not those for Alberta.
Because Alberta's an ecocidal province. I'm sorry, guys. Like, honestly, like Alberta right now, here's the thing. Everyone in Alberta was like, don't be, no.
Okay, remember that people on the stream are our friends.
I know.
Okay.
But guys, what I'm saying is like, let's be fair. A lot of people in Alberta were like, don't be smug, Ontario. You voted for Doug Ford, so you can't judge us for voting for Kenny. That's wrong. 40% of us voted for Doug Ford, and our broken first past the post system gave an absolute power. You guys gave Jason Kenney a legitimate, real majority. He's one of the few premiers in this country who actually deserves the majority he has, because over half of Albertans voted for the UC gosh darn P, with its racist views and its homophobic views and its ecocidal views. And so at some point, there's only so much we can do. And again, I've noted this on the channel before. If the support for bad policies in your province is like 80-90%, like we want to commit ecocide, then at some point we just have to start ignoring you guys. It's like, look, no one's complaining that Bernie Sanders isn't doing enough to appeal to Alabama or Arkansas or any of the other crappy states. No one's saying that. No one's like, Bernie's got to be a little bit more, redneck. I actually take that back. I grew up in a trailer park. I hate that term. No one's saying that Bernie Sanders needs to be a little bit more Confederate to win over Alabamians or to win over people that live in Louisiana outside of New Orleans. So, like, at some point, there's only so much you can do. If Alberta has bad views, they have bad views, and we should not cater to them. And I'll say this again, and I've noted this on multiple streams, that the biggest reason here has actually nothing to do with Alberta or whether they have good or bad views. It's the first past the post system. You guys are worthless to appeal to in our system. Alberta has 34 seats. It's the fourth most. You guys should be important, but you're not, because right now, every seat you guys have, except for one, maybe one, will go to the Conservatives. And if the NDP got 5% more in the province, 10% more, they would at most win the one seat they currently have. Whereas if the NDP could get 5% more in BC, they could win 10 more seats. They get 5% in Ontario, they could win 10 more seats. They get 5% in Quebec, they could keep 6 or 7 or 8 more seats. They might not gain any, but they could keep a bigger percentage. So Albertans, and this applies to conservative Albertans, because I can guarantee you the Conservative Party takes you for granted. They got your, like, if you live in Fort McMurray, like, the Conservative Party doesn't care about you. Why would they? They got your vote, 70, 80%. So, like, so yeah, Alberta's got some genuinely, again, in United States, no one is suggesting that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have to become a little bit more racist to appeal to Alabamians. And so likewise, federal NDP leader should not bend over backwards to give, the ecocidal consensus in Alberta the credit it doesn't deserve. I'm sorry, guys. And I know the people who listen to my stream here, I know you guys are part of that good part of the province. I get that. But it's like the electoral math just isn't there. It's really sucky. A proportional system would give Alberta more weight. But we don't have it.
Okay, follow-up question from Drew M. Would you support splitting the ANDP from the federal NDP, Parlement au Québec solidaire?
No. I like the idea of our parties being linked. The only province where I wouldn't vote NDP, and I don't think the NDP should exist, is Quebec. I want a change of leadership in the Alberta NDP. People who are loyal to the party, but I don't think the needs to split. And certainly if they split, they should not be allowed to call themselves the Alberta New Democrats. That's for darn sure. That's our name. They can call themselves the Notley Party of Alberta.
Okay, Cam Chema says Maxime Bernier's riding will be a close one, particularly with Maxime Bernier running against Bernier?
Yeah. So here's the story here. I've noted this before, but I want to re-highlight it.
I read that wrong.
No, you didn't. And this is the point. So you got, who here heard of the Rhino Party? The Rhino Party is a joke party. It's existed for a long time. They run candidates sometimes, but mostly they release ridiculous platforms. Like they want to make like Windings an official language, or they want to nationalize Tim Hortons, or they want to like pave over the Great Lakes, or on and on and on. They have all these really bad ideas. And what they're doing this time is they're running a guy named Maxime Bernier in Maxime Bernier's riding. His name is also Maxime Bernier, spelt exactly the same way, and he's running under the Rhino Party. And it's sort of a joke, but if the race is as close as we think it might be, even say 20 or 30 people voting for the wrong Maxime Bernier could flip the race. Now, again, there are going to be some signifiers. There's the party name on the ballot. So people will see Bernier PPC versus Bernier Rhino, or whatever their acronym is. And so there's a difference there. But on the whole, him running could matter. But mostly it's just a funny joke. And we don't have joke candidates as often as they do in Britain, where they had like Sir Buckethead or Lord Buckethead when he ran against Theresa May, I think, in her riding, which was fantastic.
Okay, both Amy Ames and Paul Q are talking about the threats that the PPC presents. Amy suggests that even though that's kind of funny that Bernier and Bernier are running against each other, that they should take seriously, that we should take seriously the threat that they present to like influencing mainstream commentary.
Yep.
And Paul Q wants to know, what threats do the PPC represent?
Well, I think the threat the PPC could represent is that they mainstream right-wing ideology. They sort of can act as an incubator. Now Scheer and Bernier aren't working together. They do not like each other. But in a distant sense, Scheer can incubate right-wing policy, and it can almost focus group it. So, for instance, Scheer says, or if Scheer came out as anti-immigration, not just like anti-refugee, but anti-immigration, he would get hit hard at the polls, and he knows that. But Bernier can just say whatever he wants because he represents a really far right 3%, 2 to 5% of the electorate. And so Bernier can say these things, and some of them might actually be popular. And Scheer can look at what Bernier says and how people react, and then sort of decide whether or not to adopt it. So he gets free focus group testing. And again, Bernier is not doing that on purpose. He's not trying to help Scheer, but it's what the effect is. And even if, say, Scheer comes out as anti-immigrant, or Bernier comes out as anti-immigrant, and the idea is not popular, Scheer might not ever take up that idea, but it moves our discussion rightward. And now the discussion for a long time has been the same amount of immigrants or more. Very few people have been arguing for less immigrants. And so now if the question is no immigrants or very few immigrants versus more, and now the middle moves further towards now that the Overton window is moved rightward. Another effect, and this is not so much that it helps the PPC, but it could help Scheer, is that, and Scheer tried to do this in the debate, is that if Scheer can use Bernier to appear more moderate than he is. So Bernier comes on the stage and starts complaining about multiculturalism, which most Canadians like, even conservatives. And so Scheer can go to Bernier and say, look, sir, I'm a conservative, but I'm compassionate, and I believe in racial justice, and I believe in equality, and I believe in religious freedom, and you're attacking all of those things, and your ugly views are awful. And so Scheer can use Bernier to appear centrist, if that makes any sense. Now, whether or not Bernier will have an impact, I think really depends. If he loses his seat, the PPC might just disappear, and its effects will be minimal because it'll just go to the dustbin of history. But there's a chance that if Bernier wins his seat, and even if it's only him, it could give his party legs. And I think the real test is if the Conservatives win a government, that's where Bernier could find more success. Because Conservatives are much more loyal to the Conservative brand when they're out of power, because the enemy is clear, right? Rachel Notley was the enemy. The UCP formed. Before Rachel Notley, the right wing in Alberta was split between the PCs and the Wildrose. And so if Andrew Scheer takes power, Bernier could find that, or once Conservatives find that maybe Andrew Scheer doesn't implement all the right-wing policies they want, then they'll go to Bernier. And you could see a splinter that way. But again, a lot of that is predicated on, can Bernier win his seat? If he doesn't win his seat, I can't imagine the PPC surviving. I can't. It doesn't say that 10 years from now, there won't be like another PPC, or 5 years from now. But if he loses his seat, the PPC is likely dead.
Okay, Wyatt B says, what do you think of Singh not leaning into the word socialism like Bernie? And do you think that he should?
I would say it more, but Singh is saying the same things. Singh is saying much of the same of what Bernie's saying. And I think that's what matters more. He's talking about economic fairness. He's talking about taxing the rich. He's talking about fighting the super wealthy. He's talking about how they prevent you from getting the things that you and your family need. And yeah, I would love him to say the S word a little bit more. But look, we could have labels all we want. People have complained that Bernie says socialism, but he isn't really a socialist, because Bernie, like many NDPers, is largely a social democrat as well. But, it depends on your approach. I don't think he needs to say it, but I would say it more, but he doesn't need to say it to actually achieve it. It's like Trudeau can say one thing and do something different. So Trudeau can pretend to be a leftist and then say something right-wing and do right-wing stuff. Singh can appear to be relatively moderate and then do democratic socialist things.
So we just got some super chats. So I want to shout out Franco Baldino and, of course, Lisa Hildebrandt. Franco, we'll get to your question, and it's always a question that we want to answer. So
for sure,
just give us 1 second.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for those donations. Very generous. Thank you.
You guys are just talking. You were chatting so much in here.
See, this is why it's great to have Bree here. This is fantastic. We got 119 people here. We broke over 100 in some of the earlier debates, but we never got to 121, I don't think. This is very, very good. Having Brianna here makes this process a lot smoother, I gotta say.
Paul Q wants to know what you think of the libertarian movement in the United States.
I mean, the libertarian movement's really interesting. I'm not a fan of libertarianism at all, in any way, in any shape or form, at all, ever, never will be. But I feel libertarianism is actually very interesting because I feel that the libertarian to far right pipeline is actually very interesting. A lot of libertarians in the United States are, when you scratch a little bit, very much, open to fascism. And I think libertarianism, ironic as it is actually very, very much susceptible to just becoming plain old fascism or far right nationalism. And so this is the whole thing. Ron Paul was like the libertarian, but Ron Paul supported segregation basically. And Ron Paul basically, I bet you Ron Paul would be fine with slavery. Honestly, I really believe that because he would see it as a property rights issue, right? So I don't trust libertarians. I don't trust their love of markets and their love of capitalism, and I don't actually trust that they believe in individual freedom. I trust. I just don't. I don't. And you could see libertarians when it came down to it. Yeah, Gary Johnson did okay in that election, but most of those guys, they went to Donald Trump. Most of them did, and most of them will continue to do so because they don't care about liberty.
Okay, the Great Dominion said, how could someone as experienced as Judy Segro,
A Scro, but yeah, it's almost an impossible name to pronounce. But yeah,
be so politically inept to have said what she did recently about Trudeau's history and blackface?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you saw my video today. I was flabbergasted. It was ugly what she said. It was nonsensical what she said. She was lying when she said it. Basically, I can't imagine anybody actually told her that. I don't know. It was just a boneheaded move. And I mean, the Liberals had sort of weathered that storm. I mean, whether I like it or not, I think that Trudeau should have been done. If we were a country that actually was progressive, Trudeau should have been done on that plane. The Liberal Party should have had an emergency meeting and turfed him, if I'm being honest. But they didn't. And they sort of rode the storm, and now the story's back again because Scro basically said, well, they just love Trudeau more because of it, which is not true. I will admit, there are a lot of people of color that either didn't care or were mad but forgave Trudeau. But I can guarantee you no one loved it. No one was like, oh yeah, Trudeau wants to be us guys. Can you believe it? And yeah, it was just awful. And now she's made it a story again. And that's not good for the Liberals. You know, it's another day where that's the story.
Okay, several people have commented on this, but Goading Shredder says, I know, of course, with the election that the focus is on domestic policy, but I wonder if the recent Turkish invasion of Rojava will be something that Jagmeet will comment on. So sad.
Yeah, you know, what's happening in Turkey, what's happening, and Trump's response is awful. You mean we were going to have a foreign policy debate? The Munk Institute was going to have a debate, whether or not you like the Munk Institute. They're like a right-wing think tank, academic center, whatever you want to call them. We're going to have a foreign policy debate, but because Trudeau didn't want to go, they didn't have it. So in a sense, we've had very little on foreign policy in this election. Singh has made comments on things like Kashmir. Singh has had not a good stance, frankly, but the better stance of all the parties on Palestine and on Venezuela and on Brazil. But I don't know if he's going to comment on this. Not saying that he should or shouldn't. I think he probably should say something because I think what the Kurds are amongst, I'm trying to think of peoples who have gotten as hard done by than the Kurds, and it's very hard. The Kurds were promised a state after World War I and never got their state. The Kurds deserve one. But I wonder if Singh is like, look, I got momentum going on domestic issues. I'm just going to keep plugging away. I don't know if this issue is going to come up. I don't know. We'll see. If it does, it'll be like an impromptu question like the Kashmir thing where he got a question on it. I don't know if it'll be like an issue that he has a press conference on type thing.
Okay. Dan Corbin says, when did Quebec switch to Liberals? I thought they were mostly a conservative stronghold.
Okay, so the grand history of of Quebec is very interesting. So early on in Confederation, they voted conservative, like in the first couple elections. The leader of the federal, both parties were led by Anglos at the time. The first election, it was I believe, was it Blake or George Brown, I think, led the Liberals, and John A. Macdonald led the Conservatives. And what happened, though, is Cartier, Georges-Étienne Cartier, was the Quebec lieutenant. And so him and Sir John A. Macdonald formed a conservative alliance. And so Cartier gave Macdonald legitimacy in Quebec. And the Catholic Church was anti-liberal party because they thought the Liberal Party is too secular and too radical. Crazy as it is. This is the 1860s, though, to be fair. What would happen after that, though, is Laurier would become Liberal leader in the 1880s and would be Liberal leader basically until 1919, 1920. He led for almost 30 years. And from that point onward, the Quebec Party grew. This is going to be a bit of a history lesson. It's going to take me a few minutes. I hope you guys like this. Grew in Quebec, but it was still somewhat divided. The key turning point federally, I got to stress this, federally, was World War I. In World War I, the Conservative Party aligned with English Canadian Liberals to form the Union government. Not labor union, but just like a union government. And they forced conscription on Quebec. English Canada supported conscription, not without controversy, but they generally supported it. The draft and the war. Quebec, though, almost uniformly rejected it. And they forced it on Quebec. And so from then on until the 1950s, when Diefenbaker won, and that was just a one-off election, and from then again until the 1980s, the Liberals almost always won almost every seat in Quebec federally. And it wasn't until, like, Brian Mulroney was successful, but that was a bit of an aberration, and Diefenbaker had some success, also an aberration. Until the Bloc rose, Quebec was almost always fully federally liberal. But provincially, it was a different story, and this is what makes Quebec very interesting. For much of the 1920s to the early 1960s, Quebec was dominated provincially by L'Union Nationale, Maurice Duplessis' party, and he was relatively far right-wing, very anti-union, very much anti-Jew. He had some anti-Semitism within him, very much anti-minority, very much like pro-Catholicism, very much like state and church combined, and on and on and on. And so the Quiet Revolution happened in Quebec, and that secularized the province. And so Quebec was the most conservative province in many ways, but still voted overwhelmingly liberal federally. But then they became the most liberal, the most left-leaning province after, by the late 60s, early 70s, and then still voted federally liberal, but became more open to the Bloc Québécois, the Parti Québécois provincially. And so what you have now in Quebec is that provincially you have for a long time you had the two-party system, basically, where you had the Federalist center-right Liberals and the Nationalist center-left Parti Québécois. Now it's off-brand a little bit. You have the somewhat nationalist right-wing center-right CAQ, and it's different. But federally, the Bloc Québécois remains strong. So Quebec has never been a conservative stronghold federally. Only in a few elections where the Conservatives won massive majorities did they do well in Quebec. And again, in Diefenbaker 57 or 58. And then Mulroney 84. Mulroney did okay in Quebec in 88. But for the most part, Quebec has been a liberal stronghold federally. For the most part. Or a Bloc stronghold in recent years.
Okay, Franco Baldino says, how would you convince a Green voter to vote NDP?
Franco, thanks for the question. Again, thanks for the donation. We did touch on this. Again, it would depend on the type of Green. If they're like a Green conservative, it might be very difficult. But if they're a Green, it's like, what else are they concerned about? Because on the environment, I think the goal is to show that the NDP and Greens have similar plans. On some things, the Green plan is better, and on some, the NDP is better. So what you want to do is make that climate a wash. say the climate, they both have good plans. I can admit that. I'm an NDP are telling you the Greens have a decent plan. I think ours is better, but they have a decent one. Then what you want to tell them is, well, what other issues do you care about? Do you care about racial equity? Do you care about workers' rights? Do you care about taxing the rich? And on all of those, you can point to policy where the NDP is better. Either because the Greens have an okay plan, but the NDP is better, or because the Greens are just not very good on an issue. Note that the Greens are the least diverse party in this election. The PPC is more diverse in terms of the candidates being offered. Note that the Greens have attacked workers' rights when they've had the chance at the provincial level. Note that the Greens have very little in the way of meaningful inclusion of Indigenous issues in their plan. Note the way that the Greens have said they would prop up an Andrew Scheer conservative government and then show them that Jagmeet Singh has promised not to do that. And those things might help to convince a Green voter to come our way.
Okay, Zachary Galvine says, I was talking to a conservative voter tonight canvassing. He was basically a PPC supporter but didn't really know about the PPC. Do you think that Tories will try to strategically vote?
Yeah, I would say that Tories are definitely strategically voting right now. Or it's a mixture of they don't know much about the PPC. Look, Bernier didn't get 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45% support in that Conservative Party contest. Bernier came within fractions of a percent of winning the whole damn thing. So, and I know Bernier has made his full turn to the far right after leaving the Conservatives. Like, he was more believably libertarian when he ran for the Conservative leadership, but you could see some of this in Bernier. You could see some of it. And so it's not a surprise that almost half that party voted for him, and yet he's gotten almost none of them to come over. Let's say the entirety of Bernier's support is from the Conservatives. He has support from other parties, but let's just say if the Conservatives are at 33 and he's got 3%, that means he's gotten like 9%, 10% of Conservatives to come with him, even though he had 50% of their support effectively in that leadership race. So yeah, Conservatives aren't coming over yet, even though I bet you if you polled Conservatives on some of the things Bernier says, they would largely agree.
Great Dominion says, Bernier must be running low on money and or is extremely concerned about his own fate as MP because he is spending a huge amount of time campaigning in his own riding these days.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to speculate on money. Bernier, relative to his party size, could raise a lot, but you're right. That can be, but not always is, an indication that a leader is in trouble. So, for instance, Kathleen Wynne, in the last provincial election, when that election started, there was never a sense that she would visit her own riding. Not beyond, driving through to another riding. Maybe she stops quickly, shakes a few hands, gets back on her bus, and goes along her merry way. But when she knew that election was over, she booked back and basically became a local MP again and campaigned in her riding. And it worked for her. She saved her seat, and only by a couple hundred votes. If she didn't do that, the Liberals would have lost her seat too. She would be without a seat right now if she would have continued to campaign as if she had a chance of winning seats across the province. So yeah, that could spell trouble for Bernier. Or it could spell a sense that they know they can't win any other seats. They're trying to create this illusion that they're a national party, but the plan all along has been get Max reelected and legitimize the PPC brand. Legitimize the brand, which will survive even with a one-party person. And then you have all these activists coast to coast to coast. So running all these people in every riding, or almost every riding, because the PPC are running in almost every riding, isn't so much about winning any of those seats or even coming close, but it's like now you have all these riding associations, and it's about electing Max right now and then maybe more people later. So that's why he's spending a lot of time in his riding. But I think you're right. It's going to be tight. It's not. He could lose, and I wouldn't be a surprise if he does.
Okay, Jesse Cool asks, do you think Bernier would debate Sam Cedar?
Probably. I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if Bernier would go on Sam Cedar. I don't know if he would do any of the big U.S. Like, I don't know if he would go on David Dole or Kyle Kalinske or Sam Seder or Mike Figueredo, Humanist Report. I don't know. I'm not sure. I guess you could ask them to ask Bernier, but I don't know if they would have him. But that's the thing, Canadian leaders in general don't really do like the YouTube shows. Like my channel's too small. I've had some MP candidates on, but I doubt Jagmeet would come on my channel. But like it's like Jagmeet could, for instance, go on any one of those shows and get some viewership. But it's just not as Canadian a thing. Whereas Bernie has been on like Kyle Kalinski's show, and some candidates have been on those tours. It's a different culture. Canadian political YouTube is just starting. It's just starting. Like we're kind of like this group here, like us as a community, we're sort of on the ground floor. So it's just starting.
Okay, Anna B asks, do you think the NDP should reincorporate the Comer objectives of reverting the Bank of Canada to the pre-1974 policies in their platform?
Yeah, in general, like I'd be supportive of that. I mean, I'm not an expert on those sorts of policies, but I would, yeah, the post 1974 policies have generally been pretty bad, and a lot of the moves by the Liberals in that time were done to effectively make heavy spending harder. So I would generally support that, but of course, there are pitfalls and there are complications. I would need to look at all of those. I would also probably just say that, well, a lot of people sometimes focus on like, okay, it's the Bank of Canada, but at the end of the day, if we just tax the rich, we could solve the issues too, right? So it's like let's just tax the rich. Like Canada's actually got pretty good fiscal health, right? Like we have low debt to GDP ratio. Like we don't need to do anything fundamental. We just need to take more money from the rich and give it to the rest of us through social programs, and that'll be good.
Do you know Michelle Rempel has a YouTube channel now?
She does. I have seen it, and she has more followers than me, which is sad. So get everyone to follow me so I can beat Michelle Rempel. No, when I said the political YouTube in Canada was new on the ground floor, I really meant from the left. The right on YouTube has been much more active politically. Not just, Canadian right-wing figures covering Canadian politics, but also Canadian right-wing figures being like covering right-wing nationalist like Faith Goldie, Lauren Southern, Jordan Peterson, Stefan Molyneux. All these people are Canadian. They're all Canadian. Canada is a world leader in crappy people saying bad stuff on the internet. Like we per capita, I wonder if we're the best at sending out our worst people on the internet. I don't know. But on the left in Canada, there's very few like left-wing channels that cover, like there's Thought Slime. Andre Dumise has started a Twitter channel. The Surfs are good. Mexi is good. Step Back History is good. I was with some of these people on the Surf stream on Monday night, and I'll be with some of them again, I think, on Thursday. But very few people cover Canadian politics, yet you'll see lots of channels covering politics from a pro-Scheer or a pro-Bernier perspective. It's just, I don't know why the left has been late to jump on creating progressive, either like pro-liberal or even pro-green or pro-NDP channels. It's a new thing.
Okay, Justice for the Oppressed says, I saw a Toronto Star article entitled, Sing Strong Showing Could Make Scheer PM. That's scary. Please explain what they mean.
Well, the Toronto Star is lying to you, and they're trying to scare you because they want the Liberals to win. So the Conservatives they're basically saying that, oh no, we can't have Jagmeet Singh do well. It'll allow Scheer to win. But let's be 100% clear. There will be two camps of people to blame if Andrew Scheer wins a false majority government. One, the people who vote for Andrew Scheer. And two, the Liberal Party and all those who enable the Liberal Party, who lied about electoral reform and made possible absolute conservative power with 35-40% of the vote. That's it. So the Star can complain all they want about how Singh might help Scheer, but it's not true. And even if it was true, it's Trudeau's fault. But again, I will reiterate today, the poll that came out from Leger, the first one to really start showing the NDP surging, has the NDP at 18, but the Conservatives and Liberals each lost 3, showing that this gain isn't going to only be at the expense of the Liberals. And two, with the Liberals and the Conservatives both below 33, a majority is extremely unlikely. And so at the end of the day, this fear-mongering about a absolute Scheer government is wrong. Is wrong 100%. So the Star is trying to scare you right now. They're trying to scare you into voting against your interests. They're trying to scare you into voting for the people that are trying to hold you hostage. And it's despicable. It's despicable.
Okay, Adam B says, and this is a really interesting question for you, I think. What do you think is the best policy ever implemented by a conservative government in this country, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, Diefenbaker created the first federal Bill of Rights. That was a good one. The Bill of Rights. So the history of rights in Canada is that they were never really guaranteed. Like, we have rights in Canada through the British system of common law, right? Like, we have that. But those are not written down anywhere in like a formal sense. There was no guarantee of your right to speech. It was sort of just implied. And Tommy Douglas led the charge of this provincially. In 1944, when the NDP took power, the NDP there put a Bill of Rights forward. It guaranteed the right to strike and bargain collectively. It guaranteed the right of people to have rights of people regardless of religion. It guaranteed rights regardless of race. And of course, while that didn't end racism or discrimination in Saskatchewan, it didn't, not even close. It was the first recognition in Canada of a formal Bill of Rights. Likewise, Diefenbaker implemented Canada's first federal Bill of Rights, which included many of the same things Tommy Douglas did, although not the right for workers, curiously enough. But it was very important. It was very important. And of course, those Bill of Rights were not as strong as they could have been because they were just acts of parliament. They could always be changed or repealed by a subsequent government. But those became the inspiration for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So you could see that Tommy Douglas provincially and then Diefenbaker federally were the precursors for our charter rights today, for better or for worse, right? And that would be maybe my favorite thing passed by a conservative.
Okay, MJM says, this kid has a future in media. That voice is near perfect. But I want to say it is unclear whether they are talking about me or you. Yeah. So I think they're talking about me.
Well, it's good to see my voice is good. I have been told that I have a great face for radio. So, it's good. It's good to hear that my voice is nice.
Okay, Trev B5 wants to know what your book's called.
Well, this is my main book right here. It's Constant Liberal by Pierre. It's basically a history of Pierre Trudeau and his ties to labor and the left. It's through UBC Press. You can pick it up. You can also find it in your local libraries in some cases. And if there's a university library in your community, it'll almost certainly be there. Even if you don't go to the university, you can often get like a community membership and you could take out my book. So if you can't afford it, because they are a little pricey, they're $35 because academic books are too expensive. You can also get digital copies for about half that. But if you want a physical copy, if you want to read it physically, you can get it at a library and whatnot. There's also this book right here. I didn't edit this. This is through Between the Lines. I have a chapter in this book, but it was edited by Roberta Lexier, Stephanie Bangarth, and John Weir. This is basically a collection of historical and contemporary essays on the NDP. I do have one in here. It's a pretty good collection. Most of the pieces are really good. I think mine's one of the better ones. It is what it is. And then finally, my Winnipeg book right there. This would be the third book. I didn't write this book. This is a primary source book from the Winnipeg General Strike. Most of the book is how the strike leaders viewed the strike a year or two after it happened. What caused it, how the strike happened, how the government conspired with Capitol and the police to bust it, and on and on and on. It includes a new introduction by me where I explain the origins of the strike. This is available in some bookstores. This is the only one of my books that I think is sold in some chapters and things like that in Indigo. You can check at your local one to see if they have it. They don't all have it, but you can get this one through the publisher, which is Lorimer. So those are the three books that I have my name in or on in some way.
Okay, Amy Ames says, does the Green Universal Basic Income Plan still include maintaining other social safety nets, or could it be used to undermine established social safety nets? I see many say this is what they fear about half-baked universal basic incomes.
Yeah, that's my big concern too. The NDP historically supported a basic income. Back in the 1970s, it was part of our plan. But basically, we made the case that it has to be without cutting social services. Basically, it was when the NDP was more definitively socialist. It was basically a guarantee that everyone should have everything they need and without cutting social programs. It was bold. The Green Plan appears to be, And of course, the Greens are often less clear about things than they could be. It appears to be based in part on cutting a lot of social safety net issues. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of social safety net items would be cut to pay for their basic income. And their basic income is universal. Now, that sounds good, but that makes it less equal and more expensive. Guy Caron, when he ran, had a means-tested basic income. And it basically meant that not everyone would get it. Under a basic income, like the Greens want, everyone would basically get the first 20,000, 25,000 or whatever of their income tax-free, including the wealthiest. So yeah, for poor people, they would get $20,000 a year cash, which is great. But the richest in Canada would get $20,000 tax cuts, all of them, every single one. And so, Guy Caron's system was different. It didn't give tax cuts to the rich, but did give a guaranteed income to the poorest people. And it was also a lot cheaper to do that. So yeah, the Green Plan is very expensive, extremely expensive, could hurt the most marginalized people, doesn't have a good disability lens, and I don't like it. I don't like it. And I'm not opposed, hypothetically, to a general idea of a basic income, but not within the rubric of neoliberalism. It's something we're going to build. It's something we can't build now. If we build it now, it'll lock in and exacerbate inequality, not solve it.
Okay, Zachary Galvine says, what are your thoughts about the Greens saying they'd abolish the Indian Act?
It's a bad idea. Look, the Indian Act is bad. It's racist. It was founded on racist principles, but that's what Pierre Trudeau wanted to do. When he wrote the white paper in 1969, Trudeau and Chrétien wrote that paper, and they argued that it was the just thing to do to get rid of the Indian Act and basically just assimilate Indians, quote unquote. And I don't use when we use that term in Canada, you don't use Indian to refer to actual people. But if you have legal recognized status with the government, you are an Indian with a capital I, because that's under the Indian Act. They wanted to abolish all of that and basically just allow Indigenous communities to just fend for themselves. But absent an actual plan agreed upon by Indigenous communities that allows them to survive, abolishing the Indian Act is a recipe for cultural genocide. And the Greens might say they have alternative plans, but in isolation, the abolishment of the Indian Act is not a good thing. It'll just destroy the communities that exist. You need something else. So at the time when there were criticisms from Indigenous people about Trudeau's white paper, they basically argued that they needed a new sort of act, a new recognition that Indigenous people were citizens of Canada, but with more rights. And maybe that sounds bad to some people, but Indigenous people are not regular citizens. They are the first peoples of this land and should have more rights and more different ways than the rest of us. And that's the founding, and that's rooted not just in social justice language, but that's rooted in the fundamental treaties that were signed hundreds of years ago and that we should still be bound by today. And so just destroying the Indian Act and without a concern for what comes after is very, very reckless. And if I'm missing the Greens plan there, like somebody can fill it in the comments that they have a plan, but I'm very concerned about talk about destroying the Indian Act.
Okay, so there seems to be a general consensus that Jagmeet Singh could perhaps be pressured into appearing on your channel, which is kind of funny. I don't think we should do that.
I don't know. I think if we ever to have Jagmeet on the channel, certainly it wouldn't be till after the election. Things are crazy right now. And I think that, I'd have to talk with him and his team, or they'd have to talk to me. I'm not saying it'll never happen, and I'm not saying I don't want it to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen yet. I think that Singh's time is better spent other places. If I was Singh's advisor, I would not say, hey, Jagmeet, you need to go on Christo's channel today. It's going to get you 2,000 views, whereas you could, do something else and be seen by 30, 40, 50,000 people.
Okay. Dan Corbin, Cordy Ben says that he loved the conversation you did with the serfs, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a fun little thing. It was hard because there's so many of us. It was hard to follow, but it was fun to just kind of joke around and talk about the election with those guys. It was fun.
Also, there seems to be general agreement in the chat by A's and Amy Ames that there is like a proliferation of right-wing views coming out of Canada.
Yep.
And Amy says, I wonder why that is. Why our worst are so well known worldwide. I'd be interested to see why. We have some, if not the worst, turfs to neo-Nazis.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I think it helps that, Canada, we're an English-speaking country, at least a lot of us are, and so that gives us a global appeal. We people almost everywhere, like the people who are active on YouTube, most parts of the world, they speak English. So even like the growing population of Indians, people from India on YouTube, many of them also speak English because they're from the relatively educated, middle classes in those countries. A lot of them speak English. So if you have a certain view and you speak English, the vast majority of the world is a potential audience. So Canadians play a role there. But of course, that says why us? It's seemingly maybe even more than Americans. And that I'm not sure. I think a lot of these people became big when Trudeau won. And Trudeau's not a left winger. But the way Trudeau talked triggered so many people on the right that it created this like interest in the far right in Canada. And it gave these people this platform. And then they became like, I'm Canadian and I don't like Justin Trudeau. And I'm going to tell you the real truth. And so they became popular with the far right in Canada. But then all those other people in the world that don't like Justin Trudeau's vision, which again is actually right wing in many ways, became like tapped into this Canadian network. And I think that's a big factor. Other than that, I'm not sure. Maybe there's something algorithmic about it. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure.
Okay, Zachary Galvine says, do you think that the right is more organized because Ontario Proud was 90% funded by real estate companies rather than real grassroots support?
I think that's a factor. I think Ontario Proud was certainly a factor. I think another factor was demographics, too. Look, in that election, the NDP had good organization, but the vote balance was just really hard for us. I mean, even if you take Ontario Proud out, like maybe the Conservatives still win because, they just had a lot of votes in the 905 and the NDP's votes were clustered in urban areas and in certain northern areas. And it's like, beyond that, we didn't win a lot of close seats in that provincial election. We had a lot of, like, Merritt Stiles won with like 30,000 votes. So did Peter Taberns. And you can't, Joel Hardin won by tens of thousands of votes, I think. And then a couple ridings over, Chandra Pasma only lost by a couple hundred. But didn't she? Maybe even less. How much? Like less than 200? So it's like we had a vote distribution issue. But yeah, I mean, the right was more organized, and the right gets a lot of dark money. Like, look, on YouTube, it's like David Dole, Kyle Kalinske, Sam Setter, Michael Brooks, Humanist Report, Mike Figueredo. I've been on some of a lot of these guys' shows, or I've been referenced on them. They do great work, and they have massive channels, but they're not getting like sock puppet money. Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and all these guys, they're getting tons of money from like right-wing think tanks and billionaires and multimillionaires, basically to use these guys as sounding boards for their ideology. The left doesn't have that. We don't have the resources, or we're not implementing them to do it. Like, there's no left-wing version of the Koch brothers. Like, people will say George Soros, but first of all, George Soros is not a left-winger. But people will say that. But like, there is no like left-wing billionaire giving David Dole $300,000 a year to pump ads on Facebook to pump his channel up. And I think that's a big factor too. And that applies to things like Ontario Proud. There's no like, unions have spent some money, but the unions didn't have the ability to do what Ontario Proud did.
Okay, we have a question from Joshua Hunt. Hi, Joshua.
Hi, Joshua. Thanks for coming by.
He says, even if Jagmeet doesn't do well this time around, do you think he will stay on as party leader? And do you think he'll start a movement like Bernie? I think right now, okay, I don't want to make like definitive comments, but yes, you do. When do you ever not want to make definitive comments?
If Jagmeet Singh keeps his seat and keeps party status and ends the election with a sense that he was doing the right things and that Canadians like him more and he's moving in the right direction, he will likely survive a leadership challenge. There's a bunch of reasons for that. Mulcair got turfed, but Mulcair ran a bad campaign. He did. He ran a bad campaign. And so you can say Mulcair had a chance to win, or at least a chance to do really well, and blew it. Whereas you might say that Jagmeet Singh is fighting against racism and strategic voting and all of these things, and he did the best he could given the context. Whether or not you believe that, that's a debate we can have. But if you believe that, it doesn't make sense to turf him. It also makes sense to say that Jagmeet Singh, if he loses on NDP values. He loses on social justice. He loses on Medicare and on pharmacare and on dental care, childcare, whatever, right? Like, he loses the right way. And how you lose as an NDPer sometimes matters. It also helps that Jagmeet Singh, he's like 40. He became leader at 38. He's a very young man, very young. And so people might be more willing to give him another chance. Another factor, of course, is if it's a minority, it's very hard to replace a leader. And another factor is the party's not swimming in cash. Fundraising spiked in the last few days, but we're not swimming in money. And so a whole nother leadership race and a whole nother delay, and that didn't go well for us last time. It's not worth it. I think right now, Jagmeet Singh has shown me enough to give him another chance. And I think that with the polls going in the right direction, again, if he gets 18%, like Leger is suggesting, he will get probably over 20 seats. He will likely hold the balance of power in a minority government, and he will likely have a very safe seat of his own. And I don't think there'll be any real movement to take him out. I don't see it. And especially if Singh becomes more and more popular, especially if Singh is viewed by Canadians as being likable and smart and they like him, it'll be Canadians might not like us if we turf him. Right? So we have to watch out for that too. Canadians might be like, look, I didn't vote for him this time, but I still like the guy and maybe would vote for him again next time. And so I think that right now I would eat the financial cost, buy the plane ticket and all of that to go to convention to vote to keep Jagmeet right now. That's what I would do.
Okay, following that, Drew M wants to know where the next federal NDP convention is. Likely Vancouver 2021?
Yeah. So generally we do it kind of like off on odd numbered years. So every 2 years there's a convention. So the way it often works, at least for somebody here in Ontario, it's like 1 year there's an Ontario convention and then the next year there's a federal one. So the federal one, the last federal one was so 2017 was the leadership convention. Yeah, 2017 I believe was 2016 Edmonton, right? Then, right?
I think so, yeah, we were there.
Yeah,
for a minute.
Yeah, we were there for a little bit, just because it was a short convention. And then then Ottawa 2018, and so 2020, sometime next year there'll be a convention. Now we haven't been to Vancouver in a while, so West Coast might be likely. And if you want to be cynical about it, if Singh is worried about his leadership and wants to keep it, putting it in southern BC, where Singh is strong, is a good tactical move. I don't know I actually don't know where it is planned yet. It might be information that's available, but I actually don't know. If somebody knows in the comments / can Google it, let us know. But the last one was in Ontario. The one before that was out west. So the two areas that would make the most sense mathematically would be the West Coast or Quebec or maybe the Maritimes. But most outside of Halifax, I don't know if there's any cities really big enough to host it. Maybe St. John's, Newfoundland, but I don't know about that.
Okay, Jonathan Castle says that you retweeted his MMP video and it has 8,000 views on Twitter, and that was a big part of it was you. So
that's great to hear. I'm glad to help. It was a great little illustration that explained in very quick and simple terms how MMP works. And MMP is really not that complicated, but it's still important to do it the right way to explain it. And yeah, you did a great job. So I'm glad to help amplify that stuff. So.
Okay. So talk about May has said that UBI would roll back disability programs, and that she called and BMBC 1310 says she called our social programs the poverty industry. What's your take on that?
Like, okay, I get one of her, which is like, there's something to be said for how some of the ways our social programs are structured is that they make it difficult for low income people to find alternatives. But the idea that like it's an industry to help the most marginalized people, like, is wrong. And Elizabeth May is going to have a lot of questions to answer. What about all those workers? What about social workers and stuff who will lose their jobs and things like that? And I'm not saying we should just keep those jobs just for the sake of it, but I am saying that important work is done. It also should be recognized that, you can't just give everyone a flat basic income. Some people need more money. People who have disabilities, it's not just enough to give them a basic income. They have specific needs and challenges. And further to that, we should recognize that while the primary issue of poverty is material, aka if you give homeless people money and homes, they stop being homeless and live better lives. 100%. There are other challenges that social programs are needed to address: domestic violence, childhood trauma, addiction issues, mental health issues that are not purely economic. And these programs will suffer if you just say, here's your check, go to hell. And that's the reality. Maybe the Greens have they have a plan for some of this, but this idea that, like, if we just cut everybody a check, we'll be done with it. It's wrong. It's wrong. And like, maybe I sound like a statist. Maybe I sound like a nanny statist. But at the end of the day, poverty is not purely economic. And the solution is not purely economic either. There are social and cultural and political concerns. And a basic income on its own will not solve all those things.
Okay, Alibi says, what are the main things that a minority government will need to do?
Like, in a general, well, one difference is that, like, a majority, it's like it's stable. It'll last usually 4 or even 5 years. Maybe less if the party calls an election. There is a Fair Elections Act, but again, that can basically be ignored. Governments can just abolish the Fair Elections Act and then call an election. And if they have a majority, they can just do it. But that a minority government, the first step in a minority, the way it works is the party for.
No, what's the one, like, platform policy piece a minority government will need to do? I think that's the question.
Okay.
I think that's what Alibi is asking.
Okay. Well, it depends on who leads it and what the priorities are. For the NDP, the priority, one of the key points is that if we form a government, like the NDP wins and it's a minority, or we hold the balance of power in a minority government, we would make electoral reform one of our key demands. Mixed member proportional without referendum. Implement it. That's our plan. We also would likely fight for things like Medicare and like pharmacare and dental care and many of our key platform pieces. But of course, a lot of that has to be compromised because you got to work with, say, at least the Liberals and maybe even the Greens as well. But of course, if other parties hold the balance of power and it's not us, then they'll have different priorities. Let's say there's a universe where the Bloc holds the balance of power. They might demand more sovereignty for Quebec. They might demand more controls over certain policies for Quebec. They might, take different positions. If the Greens hold the balance of power, it could be different as well. So it really depends on who holds the balance of power and how strong their position is.
Okay, the Great Dominion has suggested that losing leaders need to be tossed and that Andrea Horwath is much past her prime as leader. And then there's a discussion of, if it's not Andrea, then who is leader?
Well, it's a good question. See, it's interesting. I get your point. I don't have to agree with it, but I understand what you're saying. Horwath, though, it's interesting. She continues to be exceedingly popular. And her unfavorables have risen because she gets more notice, but her favorables have risen as well. She's popular with most Ontarians. Far more popular than any of the federal leaders, including Jagmeet Singh is right now. Very, very popular. Now, whether or not you feel she's the one to take the NDP over the finish line, that's a debate. But to say that she drags the NDP down, it's not really borne by the data. She doesn't. Maybe she doesn't have the plan to get us to the end zone. Maybe that's your view, but her brand is stronger than the NDP's brand. It is 100%, especially in Ontario. Now, if it's not her, who is it? Let's say, because I think Horwath is going to run this election. I've seen no indication that she's going to quit. And if you were at the last Ontario convention, there was nobody in the room functionally that wanted her gone. There was no organized anti-Andrea movement at all in that room. As opposed to Tom Mulcair, where clearly people wanted that guy gone. And as we can see now, we were right to do that, because bitter Tom is very open in the fact that he's mad that we did the right thing by turfing his ass. But like, if it's not Horwath, then who? And I would say there are a few contenders. This is not me making a prediction, but like possible contenders would be like Merritt Stiles would be an option. Education minister, which is of course a key portfolio provincially. She's young. Former NDP federal party president, so a longtime party activist. Safe riding, so she's got some security there. Peter Taberns might make a run. He's a bit older, but he ran against Horwath and I believe finished second when she became leader. He might give it a go. You might see somebody like Catherine Fife make a run, from a less traditional NDP riding, at least when it was won. She could bring. She's not from the traditional Toronto or Hamilton bubble. You might see someone like Joel Hardin make a run, even if it's an outsider's run to push a left wing vision. You might see someone like Jennifer French make a run too. You might also see someone like Butylek approach. Make a run. To that position. There's a lot of great people that could be leader. But I think in this election, Horwath will continue to be the leader for at least one more go. Although if she doesn't win this time, even if she remains in opposition, I think it's her last go. That's my view. And I don't even know if she'll be turfed. I think she'll just be done. I think she'll step aside. That's my prediction. But who knows at this point?
Well, it's a little harder now that Jagmeet is federal leader, because he was clearly heir apparent.
That's another factor, right? Like in 2017, she almost got, or after the 2014 election, she had a rough go. She saved her job, but they had to in a sense stack the room to save her. They did. But like now it's like, even if you want her gone, if you wanted her gone after the last election, like it wasn't clear who the heir apparent was. Jagmeet was the heir apparent. He was going to be Ontario NDP leader after Andrea, almost certainly. But he jumped federally, and now he's federal leader. So the heir apparent was gone. That's politics.
Okay, Phil Rancott says, Christo, I'd really like if at some point after the federal elections, you could explain why Quebec at the provincial level voted for the CAQ in the last election and why they are still getting support.
Yeah, I mean, the CAQ... it's because they ran a very interesting election strategy. They were able to gain support with by sort of sidestepping the sovereignty question, where they weren't separatist, but they were sort of sovereigntist, and they sort of tried to thread that needle, and they were very successful everywhere but with like Anglo Quebecers. And they found a lot of success. They also sort of were eclectic. They are a right of center party. There's no doubt about it. But like they also took some relatively centrist positions. And I think they were able to offer something that Quebecers had not really seen, at least not in a long time. And then there was a lot of discontent with the other two main parties, the Quebec Liberals and the Parti Québécois. And so all of that together created a situation where they were able to win the election. And again, they only got 38%, but they won a huge majority. But if you're right, if you look now, that government is incredibly popular. And they've tapped into, Quebec's affairs. And they're not running a hyper right-wing policy. That's key to note. They are doing things like Bill 21. But again, Bill 21 is supported by a big majority of Quebecers. But they're not wide-scale privatizing. they're not doing like hardcore ideological conservative things. And I think that's one of the reasons they're remaining popular. They're a moderate on some economic issues. And I mean, even like the Premier Legault, like he said something that like conservatives would never say. Like he was asked about like how like a lot of businesses in the tourist regions in Quebec were struggling to find workers. And then what he said was, raise your damn wages, you'll find all the workers you need. Which is not what a conservative would ever say, even though that's the market ideology. But conservatives never want to hear that, right? They never want to actually have to raise their wages. And so when he said that, businesses flipped out. But he was right. He was right. You know what I mean? And so that's something that a traditional conservative would not say. But he said it. And I think that's why Quebec is still kind of in love with Legault, because he's not a traditional politician.
Okay, Wyatt B says, what's up with Tom Mulcair?
He's awful. Tom's awful. I went to that last convention and I voted against him. I'm proud of that fact. People at the time were like, it's a mistake. We made a mistake. There's the Tom Mulcair Facebook group. But like Tom Mulcair has been a bitter little baby for the last couple years, and he needs to realize that his downfall was overwhelmingly his fault. And now he just doesn't want to see Jagmeet succeed, because how dare somebody else do what he couldn't do. And it's been great to see all of the big names in the party like start to go at him like I've been for a little bit. Like if some of my tweet, like I tweeted something about Tom being like a stupid head or whatever, and like MPs and MPPs liked and retweeted the tweet. I won't name names here, but you can go on Twitter and see. Basically agreeing with me. Like Tom Mulcair is, let's just put it this way. If Tom Mulcair ran half the campaign that Jagmeet is right now, he'd likely be prime minister. But he didn't, so he's not, and I'm glad he's not our leader anymore. Good riddance to bad rubbish.
To be fair, though, to Tom Mulcair, he did stop that and go away. He did do exactly what the party directed him to do, which was try a centrist platform and try to gain power that way. And part of me does feel bad for him, not for the things that he's done right now, but part of me does feel bad for him because he was exactly what we asked him to be, and then we cut his head off for it.
Well, I mean, I would agree to a certain degree, and I did note that. But some of the things went too far. We asked him to be relatively moderate, but we never asked him to make a no more taxes pledge, which is what he did. We never asked for that.
Apparently, that was a mistake.
Yeah, well, he was wrong.
Yeah.
And so no, like I have very little sympathy. I was like I felt okay. I wanted Tom turfed. I did. But I felt bad at convention. I cried a little bit. I did. Like, it sounds sentimental, but I'm like, man, I feel bad for doing him dirty. Funny moment. We're in the airport coming home in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And so we're waiting in our gate. Yeah. Chantal Hébert, from the Toronto Star, Radio Canada, CBC, famous lady, comes around the corner because she's on our plane. Like, she takes the plane like everybody else. And we all look at her because she's something of a celebrity. And she's like, don't look at me. You guys did this.
My hands are clean. No blood on my hands.
Because it's like we kind of stabbed him. But here's the thing. We felt like we stabbed him in the back. But really, the knife should have been sharper and in his front, because he stabbed us ever since. I have never felt more retroactively correct in a decision that I at the time was unsure of. 100%. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Tom, if you're watching this, go to hell. No, go to hell, Tom Mulcair.
Easy. See, you've distracted me now, and I'm not even finding questions anymore.
Yeah. Go. I don't know. People.
Okay, there was another question.
Look, I'm saying one of the great things about Jagmeet Singh winning is like seeing Tom Mulcair's face that night. It's good. Mwah! It's gonna be great.
Okay, well,
sorry, I might have distracted Bree. If we miss questions, come down with questions.
Okay, but I think we're wrapping up.
Okay.
Sorry, hold on.
I'm coming in hot tonight, guys. I'm coming in hot.
Veritas says, ha ha ha, you're sleeping on the couch tonight at Christo Evelise.
No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Wait,
Stop that.
it'll be fine.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, last question. The Great Dominion. Didn't Chantal Hebert work for the Trudeau Foundation?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, the elite in our country are notoriously incestuous. Like media elite, political elite, economic elite, cultural elite. They are. Even on the left. Like, let's be fair. Like, we've had a lot of dynasties in the NDP. Like, we've had father and son and daughter and son, or daughter and father and mother and son pairings in our history. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but I actually have no clue. I have no clue.
Okay, I found the last question.
Okay.
Or the last comment. Veritas says, and Amy agrees that the last debate was really off-putting in its format, and that they need to fix the debate structure to re-engage Canadians.
Yeah, that was an awful structure. I noted on my post-debate stream last or on Monday night that the format was really bad. I'm not saying a debate can't work with 6 people, but the more people on the stage, the more strict the moderators have to be, and the more structured the format needs to be. If it's just 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 people, like let's say it's just, Jagmeet Singh, Elizabeth May, Justin Trudeau, and Andrew Scheer. That's it. Just those 4. Then it's like you can have a more of a free-flowing format. It's still not great. Like the McLean's debate still had a lot of these moments where you couldn't hear anything. But it was manageable because it was only 3 people. With 6 people on the stage, it didn't work. And I think that Jagmeet was really bright in how he approached it. Because a 6-person debate with a bad structure like that one was never going to ever be about, here's my carefully laid out point. It's always going to be about hammering your message and getting the one-liners that are going to make the news. And Singh did that brilliantly. Whoever debate prepped Singh for that night did a masterful job, because they knew the format was going to be, awful, and that you had to game the format. It was a broken game, but you still had to play it. And Singh played it better than anybody else. And that's why everyone thinks he won. He did a good job, but it was also a broken format. Now, the question is, Thursday night, tomorrow night, I'll be doing a stream after that debate as well. Brianna, I don't know if Brianna will be joining for that, but I'll be doing a stream for that as well. But that one, we have to remember, is still going to, I think, have the same general format. But I wonder if they'll make tweaks, even small ones, to address some of the concerns. Because it was bad. It was really bad.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's it. And we'll probably wrap up. Thank you so much for all of the kind comments. I'm going to make sure that Christo reads them afterwards, and your support is always great. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. So guys, thanks again for stopping by. This was really great. The turnout I was expecting a smaller turnout, because the other ones I was always piggybacking off the debates, and I thought like YouTube algorithms would funnel people here. But like today we were consistently above 100 for much of the night. And I think this is maybe the best stream yet in terms of general engagement. This is great to see. In general, here's how it's going to go. Every Wednesday night, I will be doing a live stream. Brianna will usually be here on the Wednesday ones at least. I will also live stream after the debates. So I've been doing that for all the debates thus far. So Thursday night, aka tomorrow, I'll be doing that. I believe, I have to confirm, but I believe we're doing something similar with the Surfs again. So I might be doing a live stream with the Surfs from 7 to 9 or whenever the debate is, with them like I did that night, and then hopping on here afterwards. So stay tuned for that. After the election, I will likely move towards, we'll continue to do the Wednesday streams. Before we did them every 2 weeks, but I think I want to move towards a weekly schedule. There'll be lots to talk about once the new government takes root, whatever it is. And then also, this channel isn't purely Canadian. We will talk U.S. politics. We'll talk Bernie, especially, and Liz Warren as the American election becomes, as they actually start after this long year of talking. They're going to start soon. And so we'll get into that as the time goes on. Other than that, if you guys want to support the channel, you can do so on Patreon. There's a link on my channel page, and it's just my name. If you just my name and Patreon, you'll find it. But the biggest thing you guys can do is what you were doing tonight. Coming here, watching it, liking it, leaving your comments, sharing it with those who are like-minded. It really helps to grow the channel. CBC has been noting, actually, that it's harder for political channels to grow nowadays. And so one of the best ways to help channels, like whether it's big channels like David Dole's or small ones like mine, is sharing the content on social media, sharing it with your friends and colleagues and things. It helps to spread the message. And because we're doing like pro-NDP stuff, if you want to help the NDP, maybe some of my stuff can do that. One final thing, I'm going to confirm the details, but David Dole and I might be doing something on election night, maybe on Twitch, because they're less iffy about the whole copyright thing, where we might do a kind of live analysis of the election as it plays out. Not 100% confirmed, but I'll get you some details when and if that comes down. So, guys, I hope to see you guys next time. Have a great one. I'll see you tomorrow night. And, of course, you'll see me in all my videos in between now and then.
Okay, bye, guys.
Bye.